Hello, Avatar fans, and welcome to the next episode of the Avatar Online podcast. This is going to be episode 287 of our regular shows, and we're recording this one on March 7th, 2025. This is the official podcast for the fan site Avatar The Last Airbender Online.com, and I'm going to be your main host, Morgan Airspeed Prime. Joining me on the podcast is Greg2B from the site.
What's up, everyone?
Excellent. So, on today's show, we're going to focus in on the brand new Legend of Korra comic that came out earlier this week, the Mako one-shot comic, the first Korra one-shot comic, the Mystery of Penquan Island. But before that, we are going to cover a couple news topics focused on Avatar merchandise. Mainly one big one, which is that we did get a look at the big Jazwares Avatar toyline. But we'll actually start with the other one, which is, I suppose it's kind of more negative news, at least in, I think, the reception from most Avatar fans to this one.
Yeah.
It's the, what's this? Funko Pop, Avatar Legends X Funko Series 2 Digital Pops. So this basically is read. This is NFT Funko Pops Avatar Wave 2. We got a wave of this, I think, back in 2022. Basically, you buy digital card packs where you get NFTs. You have a chance to get an NFT kind of that's associated with one of the physical pops, like attached to the wave, and then you can redeem that eventually to get a physical pop. But those are, I think, 0.5%, 1.5% chance things out of the digital packs. So you can definitely participate in that and not actually get a physical pop. A lot of people didn't like this when it first happened, and especially seeing the second wave pop up, people especially don't like it for the same reasons, but also I think other reasons of like, why is this wave like 10 times better than mainline waves of pops and stuff like that. So before we get into we'll go through them sort of pop by pop. What are your thoughts on this? A bunch of years later, but they have done a series 2. What are your thoughts on this happening again?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It seems weird to me because I'm not, I don't really follow too much the trends of NFTs and stuff like that. I do know that, they're still around, they're still popular to some degree, but I don't know, the strength of how strong that is in general, but clearly they see a value in it as they're willing to go through it for, this amount of effort, which is, I don't know. No, I think, for people who are really, into the Avatar stuff and, want the pops and, the designs that are pretty cool, as we'll talk about in a second, it's too bad that they're, essentially sort of like paywalled behind a chance of getting them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my understanding is that the actual NFT aspect of these waves have never really been anything significant. That the money is all in the physical items at the end of the day. The rest of the pack that you get, like if you open a pack of 15 or whatever, and you don't get one of the physical ones, it is just kind of images of Funko Pops basically. So there's no one really wants them necessarily, except if they are the token to unlock the physical one. The physical ones, as far as I'm aware, maintain a certain value just because this system just bumps the price up by default. So even the ones where there's the most of them available, and then maybe it's the least interesting one in the wave, is still going for 70 at the absolute kind of minimum. But then the actual kind of grail, really fancy one is going for hundreds and hundreds of dollars on the kind of secondary market. And I think the expectation is that this one's going to be kind of much the same, but we'll go through it here. So the first picture here shows off the kind of non-Avatar one, though it's kind of a Funko character dressed up as an Avatar one, Proto as Appa. It is flocked. I guess Funko people actually like the original characters, but I think if you're an Avatar fan, you'd be a bit upset if you got this one compared to the other ones. Though, if I remember the last wave, I think the way you go about getting this one is slightly different than the other ones. I don't really know. It's not particularly interesting. But any thoughts on the Proto?
Yeah, no, I didn't. At first, I didn't get that. I had to look up some things to actually understand that because I wasn't in the know with that. It's interesting, but yeah, I think as a fan, I'd be confused if I was just purely an Avatar fan getting that.
Yeah, in Wave 1, it was Freddy Funko Pop as Aang, I think. So
right.
Yeah. The other one, though, and I think this is one people are definitely a bit upset about, we get Sokka, and they call it in wolf mask, but it's basically Sokka in wolf armor. It's his Day of Black Sun full kind of warrior outfit here. This is one that I think everyone has been asking for in one of the kind of more recent waves, because we've had a few Sokkas at this point. It feels like this is kind of one of the only outfits we haven't got. So this is really kind of sad to see kind of behind the kind of this system, and pretty much confined to at least 70, but probably more, because you'll probably be in demand. So a lot of people don't really want to pay that. It's a really nice Funko though, so kind of unfortunate. But what are your thoughts on this armored Sokka here, also in the NFT way?
Yeah, no, I agree. It's definitely one of the more interesting ones, and it has been requested. I think him and just that armor, I think it really, stands out, because usually they're more sort of casual wear. But here we get to see him don in the full, Water Tribe getup here, and I think it really, it really stands out. I think whenever you get a Funko with like a lot of, accessories to them, it stands out, and it's pretty cool. So yeah, I could understand why people would want to get this one, and why it might be quite hard to get.
Mm-hmm. The next one is Vaatu. Technically, it's Unavatu rather than just Vaatu, but still, like the first ever Vaatu merchandise. It's the first Korra pop, I think, since the NFT wave, because Korra just doesn't get mainline waves either. So that's the other part of this that's frustrating, is just that like all Korra pops now are just kind of behind this system. So this is kind of crazy, but yeah, it's glow in the dark, Unavatu, the usual thing, the general black, but then the red effect plus a little bit of white. It looks really cool, because this one doesn't seem as Funko Poppy, because it's such a kind of monstrous kind of figure in the first place. So it kind of just looks like a slightly chibified Unavatu, which is cool. Definitely one I'd want to get. It's just, again, this is also going to be quite expensive if you want to get this in any way. But your thoughts on Vaatu getting a pop?
Yeah, no, that's not something I think I would necessarily think that they would do per se. I mean, it's a cool design, and it's definitely like, they did a good job with it, but it wouldn't have been one that I thought that they would have done. But I guess maybe because this is sort of like the NFT wave, they're willing to do it in these sort of like, limited-ish quantities behind, this sort of specific system that they have. But yeah, it's pretty cool. I definitely can see why people would, want to get this one out of all of them. It definitely doesn't quite feel like a pop, which I think, for people who, like us, who might not really be in the pops just for the pops, this would be like one we would want to get just because of how it looks.
Mm-hmm. Another Korra pop up next. It's a Korra in kind of spirit form. This is basically the way she looks after she recombines with Rava, where like because of the kind of reunion post-harmonic convergence, she just is like glowing blue, like Rava is like coming through her kind of completely. We've had a somewhat similar Korra pop to this. One of the exclusives that did actually come out in like the main line was basically this look of Korra, just not all blue, but still having the kind of Rava kind of effect coming through. So from maybe just like a little bit earlier or after this scene. Still, this is a very cool glow-in-the-dark Korra that we haven't had one like this before. And again, for Korra fans, there's not much Korra merch out there, so this being another exclusive or high-end piece is kind of frustrating, especially given that it looks pretty nice. But thoughts on Spirit Korra here?
Yeah, no, I agree. This one is definitely very nice. I really like sort of like even the base color, even without it being in sort of like the glow mode that they show here, which is kind of hard to show that through pictures regardless. I think it looks really nice. I like the detail on this one.
Mm-hmm. Then the grail of the line, the one that they're kind of headlining this wave with, is Avatar Roku with Dragon. So it's actually Roku with Fang. Definitely more of a deluxe pop because it's Roku. But he's firebending, he's holding fire in his hands, he's on a base made of fire, and then he has the pretty big kind of fang dragon kind of effect part kind of wrapped around him as well. So, and he's in the avatar state. So they went all out here, and I think a lot of people are very frustrated about like Roku being locked behind this as well, because they did Karuk in Wave 1, which was frustrating. Kyoshi does have a normal pop, though it is kind of spirit version of Kyoshi. So they've been kind of hit and miss about if they're putting the past avatars in, but exclusive or kind of mainline waves. But I think this looks really, really good. Again, this is one I think everyone's been asking for, but I think the expectations are this is probably going to be like multiple hundreds, like super expensive. So a lot of frustration about this one. But thoughts on Roku?
Yeah, this is awesome. Yeah, I think just like the other ones, when you have more elements onto the Funko Pop, it just sort of elevates how it looks in its design overall. This one definitely, they did a really good job composing this one. And yeah, it is unfortunate, like we're just repeating that it's just behind, this sort of system.
Mm-hmm. Then the last one here is Aang in armor. It's basically Aang from Sokka's master, I believe, the weapon shop, where he puts on the crazy armor for a second and then falls over. Yeah. So this is more of a really niche pick one. I don't know. It kind of feels like this and the Proto are kind of like the ones you maybe don't really want to get, because like there's so many Aangs in the Funko Pop line that like it looks cool, but like it's a very like small scene from the show. It looks cool. It's metallic as well, but I think a lot of the other ones are better. But any thoughts on the Aang in armor?
Yeah, I mean, this seems like it would be one that would be done in the more sort of like limited type run, because it is, like you're saying, that's like, unless you've watched the show and you really can pick out things, like you would be hard to sort of like place when this was, because like this is the only time he's ever wearing this armor, and it's done for laughs, it's done for the memes, basically. It does look cool. It's nicely done, has a nice detail on it, so it definitely, sort of stands out. But like that could be any character in that armor, there's nothing really that distinguishes it as sort of like Aang. I don't know how they would have done like the wind sword that he sort of talks about in this, specific scene here, where they're like, oh, that would be a cool thing to have. But yeah, otherwise, yeah, it's cool, but it doesn't, that wouldn't be one that I would particularly want to get out of this wave.
Mm-hmm. The wave, I think I think they have kind of officially announced this via Screen Rant, but then it got taken down, I think, because the information wasn't correct. It's actually launching, I think, on the 18th, not the 11th, like in a lot of the reports. Not sure what the situation is there, but obviously, like, I think most Avatar fans don't really want to take part in this, and most of the people who are excited are more of the kind of collector crowd who's more into the pops for the value proposition than, I think, the characters. So that's the unfortunate kind of money aspect of this. But we'll move into better, more positive merchandise news, because this is kind of what we were waiting for. The anniversary alluded to this. The Jazwares toy line coming out later this year, and now we actually get to see a bit of it. New York Toy Fair was happening earlier this week and last weekend, and they were showing off a bunch of the stuff at the Avatar booth as part of the Jazwares kind of section. So, bunch of different lines here to go through. So, I suppose, first of all, the booth, because we did finally get a video just showing off the full booth. It's pretty nice. They've got some nice Avatar graphics up in the background. They had a screen showing clips from the show, because they were really highlighting the 20th anniversary. They even have a thing saying that, especially like the Aang and the 4 past avatars behind him piece of art. Always cool to see, like, especially like Karuk and Yang Chen on a big official kind of thing like this. But before we get into the actual stuff, what were your just thoughts on the booth and the kind of setup they had here at Toyfair?
Yeah, no, I think it's great. It's, it feels, like sort of a classic you would have at any sort of the conventions and stuff like that. But no, I think it worked pretty well just to see, all the different, items that they have on, on display for anyone who's, able to go to this specific sort of event. No, I thought they did a good job with the actual, setup. Mm-hmm.
I suppose we'll start with maybe the least interesting stuff, which is maybe just the kind of cosplay items, the roleplay stuff. The one they have on display at the booth is basically, it's like an Aang kind of cosplay thing where like you get like his outfit, a staff kind of stick thing, and then an Aang mask. In a separate video, it was shown off that there is like a Zuko mask, and I think it's actually an Aang and Zuko 2-pack kind of roleplay set. So that's kind of interesting. I think most people are kind of like excited at just the idea that like, hey, they're really doing different stuff. Like, we've never really seen this before. I think the original Avatar toy line had like 1 or 2 roleplay items, but it wasn't really a focus. So we haven't seen this sort of stuff in a very long time. It's obviously not for a lot of people, but it's like, okay, they're going for it. That's an unexpected kind of part of the merch line, and all things considered, I don't think it looks bad as like a kind of cosplay kind of Halloween outfit set type thing. But any thoughts on this?
Yeah. I mean, it is, basically just sort of that, sort of level of, I guess, cosplay type element. It's not like, some of the more, detailed ones that, I've seen before at some conventions. But as far as like a mass consumer version of that sort of thing, no, I think it'll work pretty well, and I'm sure people will be interested in getting it.
Mm-hmm. Then we'll move on to the plush. Now, we've seen a lot of plush before, but I suppose this is going to be part of a mainline thing. This should be available in a lot of stores versus other lines, which I think have been more niche specialty kind of items. But this is the 8-inch classic plush line. It seems like wave 1 is 4 different characters. So there is an Aang. It's a book 1 Aang. There's an otter penguin, and then there is a Momo and an Appa. I think the impression I've got from this from most people is that they really like the kind of animal focus here. The Aang is cute as well, but like I think it's the animals that are, I think, getting a lot of the attention here, which I think is maybe just that, like, I think we've seen a lot of chibi versions of characters before, so the animals are a little bit more in focus, especially something like the otter penguin, which isn't done all the time. So that's definitely a kind of positive, and I'd like to see future waves have more interesting animals as well. But thoughts on these chibi plushes?
Yeah, no, I think the animals just lend themselves better for being plushes, just, from how we, generally, do the animals and stuff like that. So no, I think those are pretty cool. I mean, that's, something that, a lot of people are just sort of interested in. You can get it for younger people as well, or younger kids. So no, I think those run the gamut. They always seem to be very well sought after and usually hard to get once they come out as well. So that's probably one of the better ones that'll sell just to the general audience, I feel.
Mm-hmm. Then also in the kind of core section of the booth, but also on the kind of main display, 4.5-inch classic action figures. So if you look into the packaging details on this, the idea of these is that they do have kind of action features. They're not just kind of straight action figures with articulation. They have some, but I don't think the articulation is the focus. So they mentioned that like Aang has like a spinning staff effect, and that the Zuko has a kind of roundhouse kick action. I don't think we know specifically how these work, but I'm guessing it's like spring loaded or there's like a coil system in place. It's just not super clear what the situation is. The ones that they have on display here are Book 1 Aang with the spinning staff, and then Book 1 Zuko with the kind of fire kick action, and then also a variant of the Book 1 Aang, which is the kind of spirit world version, which is kind of all kind of fancy blue and not all transparent, which is usually the way they do this. There's a little bit of transparent plastic, but it's actually just a blue paint job, which I think actually looks kind of interesting. So not super varied on the characters here, but I suppose it's different because they chose different outfits for this wave compared to the other wave the other line that we'll talk about in a second. But what are your thoughts on this? The kind of more kids focused action feature line?
Yeah, I mean, I think it works for what they're sort of going for in terms of like, limited mobility, but they have, one key thing that they can do to sort of, keep them interested in and not, them be sort of like overly complicated sort of pieces, which is, I feel like that's what they're going for here. So no, I think they look okay. I think they're good. The Aang one is pretty, I don't know, that definitely feels a little bit unique because it isn't so transparent. So I don't know. I'm not sure if I really like the paint job or not, the way that they have it set up, but it definitely stands out, so that's pretty good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of this is going to really depend on like, okay, how interesting is the actual action feature of this, and that like the Aang, for instance, like is it a wind up wrist or something like that, so it spins in that way? I don't know, or is it just it looks almost like the shoulder is maybe where the gimmick is, which is maybe not the kind of way you kind of want the staffs to spin. And in the Zuko, I think it's just very difficult to try and make out what the action is meant to be in terms of like kicking. I'm guessing it's some sort of thing where like you can probably like pose him with the leg kind of sticking out, and then he has like a wind up waist or something like that. I don't know. It's hard to make out. But they look decent given that it's not the collector's focus line, which brings us into the other one, which is the 6.5-inch classic action figure line, which is definitely aimed at more collectors. You can tell from the packaging, one's in the kind of classic plastic clamshell, and then this one's more in the box with a window, which is very in line with like what the Star Wars like Black Series packaging is like, the Marvel Legends line, and that's kind of what we're doing here, because all the figures do say Avatar Legends up in the corner. They're only showing off Avatar stuff here. We'll get into I have one interview comment from high up at Paramount we'll talk about. But the classic action figure line here. So they have 3 figures on display here. It's Book 3 Zuko, Book 3 Aang, and Book 3 Katara. All come with bending effects and some accessories. Also an entire like different head, it looks like all of them come with. And then the very unique thing that we haven't seen on Avatar before, cloth goods clothing here for a lot of the kind of cloth flowing kind of robes and stuff like that, which has been a pretty bad hindrance on previous toy lines trying to do this in plastic. It basically almost negates articulation, because like a lot of Kataras have just this huge chunk of plastic that makes her legs not work really. So they have that here. These are clearly still in some sort of a prototype stage, because you can see like with Aang especially, pants are the wrong color, missing some details on the clothing. They don't have his arrows fully painted on, mainly on his arms. And then you can see the difference between like the cloth goods in the packaging compared to the ones they have out on display. So it's a little bit unclear about like which one's further along or what. I think I can see the ambition of what they're trying to do here, and if it gets like improved before release, it probably is the best kind of mainline wave that we've had, because I think the 6.5-inch scale is pretty nice. Like that's big enough to where like the articulation should be pretty nice. I like that they're starting off with all the Book 3 characters, like Book 3 Katara getting an action figures. Like this is a first, basically. She's had statues before. Like I don't even, Funko haven't even done Book 3 Katara. So that's a huge kind of positive. It's just, we hope to see more characters, obviously. But what are your thoughts overall on the like more collector focused line here?
Yeah, no, I think this feels in line with what we've sort of come to understand from the ones that are a little bit more, professional, aimed a little bit more higher in their sort of audience. Yeah, you can definitely tell that some of it might be, things that they're working on, which, these products are always sort of like in progress until they're ready to ship. So that's not too surprising on that front. But in terms of what we see so far, I like where they're going for here. It definitely feels like these have, like you're saying, the level of articulation that if you want to pose them and doing something else, you definitely can do that. And definitely feel like they come with a lot more accessories than I feel like we typically sort of get, or ones that, we actually sort of want. And yeah, being Book 3, I mean, I hope they just, continue on with doing, just this is the starting point for me, because, we don't really need to start over again, but I get it. It's another, another company, another line. They always have to sort of start somewhat ish from the beginning, and they have to start with Avatar because that's the main lane, sort of stories there. So, but no, it definitely looks like this is a good start.
Yeah, like I suppose there's going to be a Book 1 in this line. It just doesn't need to be Wave 1, I suppose is the idea. Like these type of lines, they always want the main character somewhere available. So, when they need an Aang, it's like, that's when you break out the Book 1 Aang to go along with, Toph and Sokka or something like that in a future wave. Before we go into the final few things, the kind of more collectibles, I will bring up the interview comments that we got from, who is this? This is SVP Licensing, Consumer Products and Experiences at Paramount. A question from Toybook comes up about Avatar. Avatar is celebrating 20 years. How will Paramount and its partners highlight this anniversary at Toyfair and throughout the year? They say that they're gearing up for a new Paramount Pictures film to debut in early 2026. So that's a positive sign that they're saying early as well. This year is a celebration of how the original series has shown its staying power, ability to find new fans every year, and sustain business at retail. This summer, we'll be launching a new toy line for the Korra series with Jazwares. So I think that is the first time we've got the direct confirmation it is this summer. I think we were leaning more to the end of the year, but it's actually going to launch in summer to coincide with the anniversary, which we'll be previewing at Toyfair and later and separately And then, later this year, we'll expand the line in support of our upcoming theatrical release. So that's a big comment. I don't think there's been that many comments from whoever's at the booth about the situation here. So that's that. And then, yeah, they mentioned there's going to be costumes, apparel, tons of new books, and specialty retail items. There's another comment I'll get into in a second here, but what are your thoughts on that comment of we'll expand the line in support of our upcoming theatrical release, given that we've now seen some of those lines? Do you read into that waves of these specific toy lines will just be the movie, or will it be a separate thing?
No, that's a good point. I mean, I assume, to some degree, they're going to have to do something that coincides with the movie that would just, be sort of smart business sense to have something ready to go with it. And it feels like this is like their main, partner that they're using right now as their sort of production for these toys. So if there were to be, anyone that they would do, for this, upcoming movie or maybe even the upcoming show, Jazwares seems to be the one that they've tapped as of right now. So I wouldn't be surprised if they have something, already in the books for that when it does come out, especially with, how long these things take to actually sort of produce and stuff like that. Like, if they are really planning on it, I'm sure they're already sort of like in the thick of it now. That would be my hope there. And yeah, the fact that they're going to expand it throughout the year, from what we've understand, this is going to be like an ongoing thing for the year in terms of stuff coming out. So I just hope they continue with it.
Yeah, like I said earlier, like it does say Avatar Legends on the corner of all the packaging. And then, at least to me, the packaging is definitely done in a way where with just a few graphic changes, like this can be the exact same packaging for Korra figures. You change the Avatar logo to Korra's logo. On the side of the box, you just say Korra, book 4 or whatever, and that's it. Because it seems like they're already changing the colors depending on what nation the character is from, and it seems like that's the situation there. Where like, I guess that would also change for the movie, like Aang the Last Airbender, but it's older Aang in the packaging, who I suppose would be the full 6.5 inch figure. Where I am assuming these characters probably are a little bit shorter, with that being the scale, but I don't think we have a great comparison to go on with that. The other comment from the Avatar stuff was, again, they mentioned Jazwares, and then for Jazwares, the Avatar product line is expanding far beyond action figures. The launch plan includes a mix of plush toys, role-play sets, and costumes, all designed to capture the immersive world of Avatar in new and fun ways. The Avatar fanbase continues to grow, fueled by the highly anticipated live-action series on Netflix, upcoming animated theatrical film, the newly greenlit animated series for Nickelodeon. Jazwares is perfectly positioned to create all new toys for both longtime Avatar enthusiasts and newcomers discovering the franchise through these new offerings. These products will not only expand Avatar's presence in the toy market, but also provide fans with multiple ways to interact with the world of the four nations, enhancing their experience across various touch points. Obviously, some business language coming in there towards the end, but that feels like confirmation that like the series and the movie is definitely getting merchandise, of course, and that they're really going in on it. That they definitely want to go all in on this. So hopefully that means when Seven Havens comes out that we can immediately have an Avatar Pavi in the big line. We don't have to wait like 20 years to get a figure of her. So that all seems quite positive to me, and they just need to, I think, show sooner rather than later that the line is more than ATLA. I understand why it's ATLA because it's the 20th anniversary, but I really think something Korra probably should have been included here. But what are your thoughts on that? Like, do you come out feeling pretty positive that this is more than Avatar ATLA, or what?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely, like you're saying, it's speaking towards the future of things. Like, that's where their ultimate goal is to actually have something that works with the new stuff so that, it coincides with things. Hopefully, better timing than what we've seen in the past. And, it's actually stuff that people are really sort of interested in, bearing on the show being awesome and everything like that, of course. But yeah, I mean, it definitely feels like they've taken the route, which we've seen this transition over time of, putting things or adjusting the branding so that it can be more inclusive to both of the shows so far and anything else coming up in the future, right? So yeah, I mean, I think it definitely I don't know. It's always weird with Korra how they're trying to sort of position it because it's very popular, but it's not as popular as the original one, and that's where they seem in the past at least that's where their focus has been. So, it's understandable why they sort of, focus on that more so, at least in the beginning stage. But I don't know, I think if they're going to continue, it would be nice to have both of those series as well as, anything future that comes up.
Yeah, because I wonder, like, are the lines even, like, thinking, the toy maker thinking about the fact that, like, if we did a Korra action figure, it would be the first Korra action figure because like she doesn't have any, and no one has done that stuff. There are statues, there's Funko Pops, but there's no action figure of Korra like ever, and that would be a cool thing. And then like even though maybe the audience isn't as big, it is still pretty big. Like they mentioned like Avatar's the #1 animated show on Netflix, but like Korra also like when it came back to Netflix was like right up there as well. With the big numbers. So hopefully they acknowledge that. But the last things to talk about are some stuff that we had to wait a while before we actually got some coverage on. This whole wall of the booth just seemed to be a blind spot for a lot of people. But we finally got it. Some more collectors focused items here in terms of them being collectibles. First up, 2.5-inch classic blind figures. So these are blind box Korra kind of chibi figures. There's 7 in this first wave. We have Appa, Toph, Aang, Zuko, Momo, Katara, and Sokka. Interestingly, it's all Book 3 designs for the characters once again. The chibi design here is unique once again. There's like 5 or 6 different chibi figure designs. This one goes for the really small dot eyes, but then they also have like expressions using the kind of cheeks, kind of rosy cheeks and stuff like that for the different characters here. So it gives a little bit of expression at the small scale. And the poses seem pretty nice overall. So it seems like, yeah, you get 1 per box. Some of the packaging is a bit weird in that they all say like on the front, Book 2 mystery figures. And I'm like, wait, what? Like none of this stuff is Book 2 except maybe Appa and Momo. Is it Wave 2? I'm very confused about why it says Book 2 mystery figures. But these seem cool. Want to know what the price point obviously is, but like I could see people grabbing these if they are readily available. But your thoughts on the blind figures?
Yeah, I think they did a good job on making them pretty expressive and dynamically sort of pose for this sort of small scale that they are. So yeah, these definitely feel like something that people would actually, legitimately try to sort of collect and get, all the 7 different ones that they have as of now. It might be hard to do that, and we'll see how available it is. But yeah, I think these are pretty cool, even if it is yet another chibi design.
Mm-hmm. And then they have a slightly bigger line of collectible figures. These ones aren't blind box. Instead, you can just see who the character is. This is the 4-inch Kawaii figure line, which is on the packaging actually called Little Elementals. Again, it also says Book 2 on it. So I'm not sure what the deal is there. It feels like it's a little bit more relevant to this wave because like Toph is here and stuff like that. But it's a wave of 5 initially. There's Book 1 Aang, the Cabbage Merchant, Momo, Appa, and then Toph with the Earth Rumble belt and doing earthbending. So it's another kind of more chibi style. This one's a little bit more classic. They're bigger. I think these seem pretty nice. And I like that they offer this. It's not just one line that you have to do the RNG stuff with the blind boxes. You can just go for the kind of bigger ones that are actually visible. I like the option and that it is a full line. That it gives me a lot of hope that they're doing 2 things that are quite similar but slightly different. But thoughts on the 4-inch Kawaii line?
Yeah, I mean, I think these are good as well. I wish they had the ones in the blind one in this size, because I think that would be like the perfect sort of balance of characters that we're getting stuff. I mean, the Cabbage Merchant is cool and everything like that, so he's always fun to have. But I don't know, I rather would have more of the sort of mainline sort of characters in this size as well. But the designs overall are fine. I mean, Aang is just sort of like his default look. I mean, that could be, anywhere in the first, two books there. So other than that, it doesn't really speak to where it is other than just the fact that Toph's there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the assumption on these is that these are going to get like many, many waves as they go forward. With lines like this, like you need to get into the kind of deeper character roster. But I'd even say with the bigger figures and stuff like that, like people at this point are looking for like, where's my highly articulated Mei action figure? Where's my highly articulated Ty Lee, especially? How long is it going to take to get to them, which are figures that no one has done yet, but they're really notable main characters. And that's kind of more of the situation that we're in on the merchandise side of things. And then, yeah, Korra stuff as well, movie stuff. So they certainly shouldn't be running out of like designs to do in this line, certainly. They've got way too much, honestly. And then especially if they do maybe full on go in on the like hardcore fan side of things and maybe do like a Rangi figure, like I think the Kyoshi fandom would like explode if they did something like that. There's a lot of cool options there if they really full on commit to this. But yeah, it's looking positive so far, and as far as I'm aware, that's not even the entire lineup. Like the original press release said there was going to be like dolls, play sets, vehicle kind of figures. So like I suppose that sort of means like, for the action figure line, how does Appa incorporate into that? Like McFarlane did an Appa, there was an Appa in like some of the original toy lines, but how are they going to do that kind of going forward? That's that's kind of the real question going forward. Obviously it means that theoretically we're only about like 4-ish months away from this line, assuming it launches in maybe the middle of summer. They might hold it off until late summer. Any thoughts, given that they seem to be locking in summer, about when we exactly might see the line launch?
I don't know. That's a good point. I mean, would they have it ready for like, SDCC? Would that be like a time where they could do it and, have people ready to buy it? That feels like that would be a good point during the summer if they could get it ready by then. But I don't know, products and consumers and getting stuff ready and getting amount of them out and stuff like that. Like that's, I don't know. I feel like that's always hit or miss, even though we've seen these, so they clearly have the designs, to some degree, but how finished, how polished are they? How, in the production line are they with these? I don't know. I mean, that's like, 3-4 months or whatever from now. So I don't know. They definitely have some times and they clearly already have things ready, but will it be enough there? I don't know. I mean, I might think maybe more end of summer and the fall, maybe, to get them, especially with, like holidays and stuff like that. So people actually really want to spend the money on buying them.
Yeah, I definitely think probably something in or around San Diego Comic-Con, whatever way they approach doing the first trailer for the Aang movie. I think they'll want a lot of this to kind of coincide together, like the anniversary with the movie being Aang as well, and you've got a toy line, and that feels like what you kind of really want to do and really make people aware that your toy line is out while you get one of the most hyped marketing moments of the year for Avatar with like trailer for the movie, and maybe debuting perhaps that like, hey, as part of like wave 3, movie designs are going to be in wave 3 or something like that, we're starting off with the classic stuff, but in a few waves, you'll get to the new stuff. There could be some cool ways to do that. A lot depends on how big, I suppose, Nickelodeon, Paramount, Jazwares go in on Comic-Con. And if they have the bigger announcements ready to go, we can never predict anything. Again, we thought the anniversary was the right way to do it. They gave it to us the day before. We can never call what they're going to do. But yeah, that's the merchandise stuff. So we'll be looking out for more information on that. It definitely opens the door maybe to some movie leaks maybe happening through the toy line, though I'm assuming they'll try to keep that under wraps. But we'll move into our main topic for this episode, which is to review the new comic that just came out earlier this week. So on Tuesday and Wednesday this week, we saw the release of Legend of Korra, The Mystery of Penquan Island, the Mako one-shot comic, the first Korra one-shot comic. very long time incoming. We've known about this book for years. Realistically, it probably should have been out like a year ago, assuming all went smoothly. This is unfortunately one of those situations, unlike other books where like there were actually like kind of production problems, like the artist had a rough year one year, and so that seemingly held the book back by that amount of time. That's why Avatar has such a giant head start on one-shot comics, even though technically both sides of the franchise were announced for one-shot comics at basically the same time, but we're only just getting started now for Korra side of things. So the creative team on this book is a script by Kiku Hughes, art by Alex Monick, colors by Diana Sousa, letters by Richard Starkings, and comic craft Jimmy Betancourt. And as usual, they have the special thanks to Mike, Brian, Joan Hilty at Avatar Studios, and a bunch of other people as well. So it's fully official, of course. And yeah, it's the start of technically a new line of comics here with Korra one-shots, and they've opened up with Mako. So we'll do our usual thing here where I would immediately recommend, if you're following along with us here, grab your copy of the book, because most of the review is going to be us going through it kind of page by page, scene by scene. We're just going to start off here with some general thoughts. So Greg, after a long time of waiting, what were your thoughts on the Mystery of Penquan Island?
Yeah, it definitely has been quite a while. I think for me, I think it's a good way to sort of start off these core, sort of one-shot comics. I think, it definitely isn't sort of like the grandest story, but, I do like that we do get it sort of focused on the brothers. We get some of their, backstory and history that we sort of have been wondering about. It doesn't answer, like everything for us or anything like that, but, it gives us a good bit to sort of go on. We get, to get to see our characters have, put in their sort of positions that we've sort of come to see them at sort of like the end of the series and stuff like that. I like that we get to see Mako still sort of, a stiff-ish type of character, but you can see that he has, heart, as we sort of have grown to see him have over time and express it a little bit more. And we get to see the brothers have a little bit of a makeup here as well. So no, I think it's a good way to sort of start these sort of one shots. I think if you're looking for something, a lot more in depth or, something overarching that's going to lead to something grandiose or big or anything like that, you're definitely going to be a bit sort of disappointed in that regard. But in terms of, a random one-shot story that if it was, timed the best, we wouldn't have been having, sort of the expectations that we might be having on it currently. It would have probably done pretty well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think this is a book where definitely, like, the format has to be talked about quite heavily, because everyone who reads the comic should be aware that Avatar and Korra comics currently are doing one-shot comics. We've moved away from trilogies. That was a missive from on high, basically. They made the decision to move away from those to switch to this sandbox-style approach. It maybe felt a bit different with Korra comics because that announcement was made, like, 5 years ago, and we're only seeing the kind of results of it now. But that is the situation. It's a one-shot comic. It's the same format as Avatar has. This is an equivalent book to Katara and the Pirate Silver, the upcoming Ashes of the Academy, and all the other ones that we've had so far. I do think that this has definitely benefited from Avatar going first and having so many books, because I think they quickly realized after the first trilogy, these need to be notable stories. They can't just be a random story with the character, because these are the only comics that we're getting. They can't just be super, super random. So they actually made the decision here with Mako to go for one of the more notable stories about the side of his family we don't know anything about, the fire side, the mother's side, Naoki. And they, in my mind, do a pretty ambitious story here in a one-shot comic and mostly get it right. I do think you can tell that this one is a kind of highly compressed story, in that it needs more than 72 pages. They do it pretty well, all things considered, but it probably should have been at least 90 pages, if not a two-parter. And I think you can see the vision for this being a full-on trilogy if they brought in some of the other characters and stuff like this, because this obviously is reminiscent of like the Southern Raiders a little bit, but also reminiscent of the Search comic as well, in that we go to a new Fire Nation location there. We do that here. It's about a character's parent. You can see the kind of vision, because the island is actually quite interesting. I like what they do here, and I think it's overall very good. I just think the format has limited them a decent bit on this one from it being absolutely amazing. And I think as we'll go through this, you'll be able to see different points at which, if they had more time, they should have let this scene breathe a little bit more. Could they have used the page count a little bit better? It's a tough one overall. But again, given that Korra has had the kind of unfortunate situation of changing creative teams between every comic series, this is a really good start for Kiku Hughes and Alex Monik. I suppose just before we get into this, just because I don't know how often we're going to stop to praise the art, but I suppose we'll talk about the art immediately now. We've had Alex Monik's art before, Cat Owl's Cradle from Patterns in Time, and then a lot of the art from the RPG books is also done by her. So she's super highly regarded already, but this is the first time seeing a full comic, a full 72-page comic by her. I think it's like super high-end art. It's so accurate, it's so clean, but it still gets the expressions of a comic, the kind of movement of a comic across really well. That like it's so incredibly accurate and interesting looking that it almost doesn't feel like this is possible in a way. I really like it, but what are your thoughts overall on the art?
Yeah, no, I think from the other elements that we've seen from the same artist here, I think it feels just like it, which means it probably took like quite a while, which obviously we know, there have been issues with it being sort of produced and stuff like that. But yeah, every single frame is very sort of clean. Like it feels like it's, done up into like a certain level. And, I'm sure it probably had many sort of revisions and stuff like that. So no, I think if you want to check it out just for the art and just for the cleanness of it and how it feels, just like we've seen in the show and stuff, like when we see like sort of like the production elements and like the storyboard stuff, like stuff that comes from the studio, not necessarily from like the animation studio, it feels sort of like on par with that, just that it's more finished. So no, it definitely feels up to that level in terms of what we sort of expect for most of the Avatar comics and stuff like that. So definitely at least, if nothing else, is on par with everything else we've gotten so far.
I think the question probably comes up here is about like scheduling, and that like the next one shot has not been announced yet. We just don't know what One Shot 2 actually is, and because there was so much problems in a way with this, it's like, is it coming anytime soon? Are they just accepting that with this creative team the book is going to be a year and a half in between books, if even that? Or are the problems over and it's actually going to be a more normal schedule now? It's kind of difficult, because I think we're used to the Avatar comics, which have had much more releases with their like hyper consistent creative teams, where like Team Gurihuru were getting books out like literally 4 months apart at times. Like some of the early comics is like part 1 4 months, part 2 4 months, part 2. Faith Aaron Hicks and Peter Wortman, again, they've been on multiple books in a row. The gap between them has changed a bit over times, but like again, they've been able to get them out roughly like every 6 months or so. We just don't know what the situation is here, but it is unfortunate that the consistency of releases has been an Avatar exclusive thing for the most part, and Korra has just had all these unlucky production problems. But what are your thoughts on that? Do you think that maybe because the art is so high quality, it just is going to take a really long time for all these books to come together?
That's a good point, and especially since they try to keep the same team for things, going forward, or at least in sets and stuff like that. I mean, if that is, I suppose that's sort of the trade-off that they have to be okay with, if that's just the amount of time it takes for, this level of quality, which I don't know. I guess you have to weigh, the costs and the results if that's actually worth waiting that long, or would it be better to get someone who maybe isn't quite as good, but is more proficient in sort of getting their pages out daily and stuff like that. So I'm not sure. The production of creative endeavors is always sort of like iffy in how it sort of works, and the monetary value attached to it and stuff like that. So I don't know. I don't know which one I would prefer. I think if it was a more sort of like overarching story like what we got with Guru and sort of the other ones, I might prefer it to be a little bit faster, even if it suffers a little bit on quality, because the art still needs to be there, but I'm more interested in the overall arching sort of stories. But with these sort of like one shot ones, assuming they're as good as we hope they are, maybe it's okay for them to take a little bit longer, especially since there's there's nothing really connecting this one to the next one. So it's like I'm not really waiting with bated breath for how Mako's going to do something next or anything like that. I have no idea what the next one's going to be.
Yeah, that's definitely the thing. It's just like there needs to be like that consistency of releases that like I think it's fair for Avatar Korra fans to expect an Avatar comic and a Korra comic to release each year. And the fact that we haven't had a Korra comic like for the last 2 years is not really kind of acceptable, even if we can understand some of the reasons behind why that happened. Hopefully they're switching up formats as Avatar Studios starts again. We're still waiting to see what this comic miniseries that Dark Horse apparently have to announce is. And is that Korra? Is that Avatar? Is that standard comic format? We have to wait and see. And then is there a new creative team involved? That's going to be interesting. But yeah, with that intro out of the way, let's get into the comic itself. So yeah, we open up at the Republic City headquarters here. Mako is in the police station with a bunch of the other officers. They're all having kind of casual conversations together, talking about stuff like movers. One of them comes over to Mako and is like, "Hey Mako, wasn't your brother in the movers? Come over here, tell us about it." And Mako basically gives them very kind of blunt answers. He's like, "Yes, he was, not anymore. We don't really talk about it." They're all like, "Hey, we want to hear some wild stories." And then they switch to, "You two were pro benders, right? Tell us about that. You must have some exciting stories there." And he's like, "It was just a job. It wasn't really that exciting." They ask him, "Do you never get the itch to do it anymore?" And he's like, "No, I'm just trying to focus on this job, being a good detective, And they make fun of him then, saying that, "Okay, keep it up. Maybe you can solve the case of your missing personality." They then say, they're just teasing, no hard feelings, but you can tell Mako's a little annoyed by this. And this is when a call comes that they need a detective in the lobby. Something has happened. So we'll start here with this opening scene here, which definitely feels like kind of character setup for the book, in that, Mako is clearly being kind of focused on here as, hey, he's not, acting the same as the other officers. He's a little bit isolated from them. He actually has interesting stories to tell, but kind of doesn't really want to engage with them. And they find him boring because he doesn't want to tell these stories. And from his point of view, he's just being serious about his job, and maybe they're not so much. But the book is going to make the point that he is a little bit over serious about this. But what are your thoughts on the setup here with Mako and the other officer?
Yeah, I mean, I think this feels pretty typical of, Mako and their character that we know of up until this point. Like he's, I think we saw him, sort of mellow out a little bit, but he's still pretty sort of, uptight in his personality, you could say, very focused on his job and stuff like that. So this feels like you're saying it's a very good sort of setup to show that, is Mako too uptight? Could he let loose a little bit? But he's still, he's really focused on his job. I think, that's probably one of his strengths of character, which is, also sometimes a detriment, is that he's really, single-minded on sort of the task at hand, but doesn't really see, everything sort of around it sometimes. But no, I think it's just a great start.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like I think the setup here is good. I'm not sure if the rest of the book like uses it maybe as well as it maybe should be, in the sense that like this feels like something we should wrap the book back around to at the end and maybe highlight how Mako has changed from his exploration, and that like he does have a personality. He can be a little bit more relaxed. He can still be focused on his job while, having more casual conversations with the others. Because I don't think the officers here are meant to be like the new Lewin Gon, who got like fired for basically being incompetent. Like, these are the new batch of officers that are meant to, at the very least, be solid. It's not that Mako is the only good detective along with Lin in the whole police force. So these are meant to be more like normal officers. Maybe not the best, but like they're not like absolutely awful. So it kind of feels like, yeah, Mako should be not best friends with them, but like it should be a better dynamic than this. Like he shouldn't be, there shouldn't be a situation where they're saying, like, you basically have no personality. But the book doesn't have the time at the end to come back around to like what that actually means. So the book almost has to settle for, let's create an issue with Bolin, fix that, and assume he's improved at the end. But it's a tough one. We'll get there. We'll hit on the points as we go through. So yeah, he's been called to the lobby. He vaults over the desk and kind of runs away from the others, basically. So then he arrives, and there's 3 kids in the office here. He takes them back to his desk and basically gets the report. Like, okay, what are their names? They all introduce themselves. So these are 3 siblings here. The boy here, the oldest boy, is named Jian, Jian. The sister is named Mingming, and the little brother is named Kibi. So where do they all live? They live in Sunside Towers in the city. Jian reveals that he's 9. What happened to their parents? They died back in the Fire Nation village where we're from, which will be revealed to be Penquan Island. Also, this detail is actually quite important to remember as you go through the book, that their parents are dead. The details of which we are not given, but are implied later on, and the book almost like doesn't guide you through that kind of reaction in a way, but we'll get there as well. So Mako connects to this, having lost his own parents. Who takes care of you? And they say it's a family friend named Hisa. They call her auntie. She brought us to Republic City because our parents always wanted to raise us here. So that's another key line to remember. Where is Hisa? She doesn't like cops. She's at work. And okay, what is the problem? Our friend named Haijun is missing. He's old, white hair, glasses. Why do you think he's missing? We stopped at his room at the Ember Sea Suites, where he's staying, but he wasn't there. And we'll kind of stop here kind of temporarily. But these characters are not just randomly introduced at the start of the book. These are going to be kind of key players in a way throughout this book here as we start the investigation here. So what are your first impressions of this kind of a trio of kids here?
Yeah, this is interesting. I mean, having younger characters, especially, from what we've seen in the past, it's interesting to see, them interact, especially with Mako, who's, somewhat sort of stilted in, sort of his initial sort of conversation with him, but he, eventually sort of warms up. So I like that he's able to sort of at least sort of make a little bit of connection, especially considering his own past and things like that. So I like that, even if it feels a bit sort of weird at the start, you can see, over time it sort of starts softening up, and, sort of the way that they sort of, interact with him, I think it's a very nice way of showing, sort of the start of their relationship here.
Mm-hmm. Mako kind of feels like, well, that doesn't necessarily mean there's anything wrong just because he's not immediately there. They point out that his stuff is all still there, even his dinner is out. There might be people around who want to hurt him. What kind of people? Bad people. Haijun is from our old village too. He helped us move to Republic City and he was going to stay for a while. Our auntie wanted him to stay for good, but this is where Hisa arrives. So she says, I told you not to get the police involved, we're leaving now. And she gets quite animated here, just not wanting to interact with Mako and just get them out of the police office as soon as possible. She says she's the legal guardian of these children, she's taking them home. Mako tries to kind of get to the core of the matter, like, hey, he was just telling me one of your friends is missing, is that true? She says nothing is wrong, this was a mistake, no one is missing, we'll be on our way. You can see that Mako has made a bit of a connection with John in that, like, he looks back and kind of waves, because Mako was getting on the verge of kind of believing him here, and they they do roughly pair the two brothers, younger brothers here, up with the two, bending brothers here. So the John, Mako, and then Bolin, Kibby will be the kind of main dynamics. But yeah, they walk out of the police office, and Mako is just kind of left a bit shocked because he does think something's going on, but why don't they want to investigate it? So it's a bit mysterious here. But what are your thoughts about this, the introduction of Hisa here?
Yeah, I mean, she comes in, very animated about not wanting to talk with the police here, which, there's various reasons why that could be, right? And, Mako's obviously considering all of that, but, I think it's already at the point, like you're saying before, that he believes in their sort of situation here. I think he can see the emotion there. And, even though, sometimes it's hard to believe, what kids say, right? It seems like at least for Mako, especially being, I'm guessing one of the younger officers on duty has more of a connection there and is willing to sort of take the leap here. So yeah, I like that sort of, final sort of connection there that they have, and the auntie that is very sort of protective because she knows more of the situation that we're not quite aware of yet.
Mm-hmm. And just before we move on, I'll just bring up some of the points I was making as we went through there. Some of those little details in the early dialogue about, like, okay, their parents died, and it doesn't really get kind of addressed. Our parents always wanted to raise us here. Like, the only mentions of the dead parents, and then there's a big reveal later on in the book that, like, makes the connection between these two scenes actually quite notable with regards to the villain of the comic. What were your thoughts just on the way they kind of, like, did that, of, like, not really being very open about the situation with the parents?
Yeah, I mean, I guess they're trying to be mysterious is what I'm guessing they're sort of going for here, which, makes sense. That's kind of the sort of lure of the story, right? And when you sort of figure out what, sort of the deal really is, which even then you're not sort of like, 100% sure, but, you can infer and understand sort of what the general gist of things are sort of going on here. So I don't know. I mean, I guess, as their kids, like, would they necessarily know sort of all the details? But, they understand enough to know that they've died and that they're not there anymore. And they know, their parents would have want them here where they're currently at. So I don't know. I wonder if there is a way that they could have put that forward a little bit better, considering, what we know, how their island is controlled and stuff like that. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Then Mako talks to one of the officers, and the officer's just like, oh, guess you're off the hook there. And he takes, I suppose, the kind of by the books way they're meant to do this, which is that, like, effectively the complaint was withdrawn. Like, our hands are kind of tied here. We're not meant to, do the investigation on our own. But Mako is interested. Their point just being our job is to close cases, and technically this one didn't properly open, what do you do with that? Mako then returns home to the apartment where Bolin is playing with Pabu. And, they just, Bolin just talks about cooking and stuff like that. He talks about the dumpling place and so on. This is where suddenly Mako just decides, oh, I'm going to do something. And he immediately puts his coat back on, immediately leaves. And Bolin's just like, that was rude. And Pabu agrees with this. So, It's a bit of an interesting one. Is there anything in the dialogue here that actually makes Mako kind of connect the dots here? I don't think so. I guess Mako just returns home and just decides, do you know what? I am actually going to investigate this. But I don't know. Did you read anything more into the jolt of reaction from Mako in this scene?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Maybe it's just the idea that, he needed to talk to someone in order to figure out sort of the extra details, or just the fact that it was outside and he really didn't want to, like, give up on sort of the case or anything like that. I don't know. It's interesting. It doesn't, there's nothing, I guess you could say, like, super obvious or, anything like where they're sort of like highlighting things or whatever, where it's like a one-to-one sort of connection. Because it's not like it's a restaurant or something like that he's going to go into, but I don't know. Maybe it's just the idea of it's like some place that people go when they're down on money or something like that. And that's, sort of connected with sort of the plight of the kids and everything like that. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Ember Sea Sweets. I'm not really sure. I guess it is the interpretation you're meant to have is just that Mako's been lost in thought about this. Bolin says anything, and he just decides, oh, actually, yeah, I'm going to go. And, we immediately cut to then him arriving at the Embassy Suites kind of apartment block here. He heads in, and as an official officer is just like, hey, I need to search the room of a man named Haijun. He thinks he's going to have to really convince her, but she's just like, yeah, it's this room. Here's the key. Go away. So he arrives at room 205, and Hisa is inside reading a letter. And they're both, like, of course, shocked to see each other here because Hisa didn't want this investigated, but then also she's gone to the place where Haijun is, so she is clearly concerned to a certain degree. She says, I told you to leave us alone, and she tries to storm out. Mako follows her, grabs the letter, it rips, so he gets kind of half of the letter here as Hisa kind of runs off. This is where Bolin kind of turns up and is just like, hey, I followed you, basically. And Bolin brings up like that we were worried about you. You've been spending all your time working. So Pabu was hoping you were out with friends or going on a date. And Mako just gives him this deadpan stare. He just says he's fine. And yeah, this is probably the one joke in the book about like Mako not being in a relationship, which I do appreciate. They don't overly linger on that. But yeah, then we get down to what actually happened. So Bolin picks up the kind of torn letter and reads what it says. It says, we'll bring back the children to the island or Haijun will face more severe consequences than you can imagine. Be wise, Hisa. So clearly some sort of a threat related to the fact that the children are off the island. Whoever has threatened them here wants the children back on the island. And this is what's happening here. Haijun's life is being threatened, and this is why Hisa doesn't want the cops involved here. So this letter kind of is beginning to bring the kind of plot together here, explaining a lot of different characters' actions, and this is where Bolin kind of gets involved in the case as well. So what are your thoughts on this whole sequence here at the apartment block and then the Bolin?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's cool how this is where, we really start to see things, pick up here. Michael doing his sort of, initial, detective investigation. But of course, this is technically sort of like off the books. It's not official in any sort of capacity, but, he's still able to sort of do his own thing here. And, the random Pabu sort of joke here, which is something that, we've seen before, is nothing new, but it works well enough. And, it's not, sort of like overdone in your face or anything like that. So I think it's, it's still cute the way that they sort of use Pabu from time to time, even though they do leave him behind later on. But, I like that at least, initially we can see them sort of have this typical sort of brotherly dynamic here with what's going on and, Bolin touching things and stuff like that. So no, I think this is a good way to sort of force them together on this sort of investigation before they even really know what's going on.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, Mako and Bolin begin to search the apartment. Yeah, Bolin just touches everything. Mako's actually doing detective work. Bolin happens to pick up something from Haijun's like suitcase. It's this special rock that he feels is sort of familiar to something he has. Like he remembers holding onto this exact kind of rock shell thing before. So we'll come back to this shortly, of course. And yeah, this is where Mako just kind of is like, hey, you go back to the apartment, try and maybe figure out your thought process there on the rock. I'll deal with the apartment, okay? So they kind of go their separate ways for now. The rock thing is kind of cool because this is what actually properly begins to bring the island into play. But otherwise, yeah, it's just the different approaches of the brothers here, which is interesting that Bolin's not an officer anymore, but here he is basically kind of being Mako's assistant, quote unquote. So it's kind of fun in that way. And then there's definitely a bit of a Momo kind of Pabu action going on here, where just like it's fun to look at the different position of Pabu in each panel because they're keeping track of that like they often did with Momo. But yeah, any thoughts here on this initial introduction of like the special rock and stuff like that?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, they draw attention to it enough that you can see how it's going to be sort of important to some degree, and Bolin seems to focus on it obviously because there's something super familiar about it that we find out later on. But no, I think this is I don't know. It's always fun to see them sort of work together because they, even if Mako doesn't want him to be there, and eventually he sort of like separates from him. You can see that they have an interesting dynamic that sort of works well. But we get to see it sort of continue on and develop.
Mm-hmm. So Mako continues the investigation on his own. He goes to where, try and find where Hisa is, where they're staying. But locals nearby playing Pai Sho say that, like, hey, she took herself and the kids and left a few hours ago in a hurry. He tries to get information from them, but they don't. They're not going to give up anything to an officer. They don't fully know. But Mako is also forced to kind of head back home here, feeling that he's lost track of the investigation here. Like, if they've gone somewhere, he doesn't even know where to start, basically, to find them. Back at the apartment here, Bolin has given Mako some food here. And, Mako reveals how kind of worried he is about the situation. He does speculate that, I think she has taken them back to the Fire Nation. Which they bring up immediately here. Isn't the Fire Nation outside your jurisdiction? Technically, yes, of course. And then we get the kind of emotional kind of crux here, which is that Mako has connected himself emotionally to the investigation. It's just this kid and his siblings, and they lost their parents, like we did. They reminded me of us, and it's actually Bolin's reaction panel that we get here. And then one of the only adults they have left, this Haijun, disappears. Their auntie gets threatened. They went looking for help, and for whatever reason, they found their way to me. I can't just leave them hanging. And Fire Nation Island, this is where kind of Bolin begins to make the connection, and we'll get the explanation on the stone in just a second here. But this is, I think, one of the best kind of character moments for Mako here, where he's maybe not the most emotional character in terms of like speaking his mind, but this is the right way to do this comic, is for him to make this kind of connection back to himself. He's always been this kind of protector character with Bolin. Now he's kind of doing that for these kids as well. And this is the kind of good trait of the character that they're kind of really showing here. When he devotes himself to something like this, he is all in, and so he's committed to the case at this point. So this is like classic kind of Mako good traits, but is he maybe too invested in it, is sort of the idea that the comic is taking. But what were your thoughts here on this conversation back at the apartment?
No, I thought this was a nice sort of, very short, but very sort of meaningful, sort of like heart to heart. This is probably like, one of the other moments where we get in this comic where we can really see, Mako sort of like express himself, which is something that, historically Mako has not been very good at doing. So, it's nice to see him doing this here. And of course, with his brother, that's, one of the people that he would, be willing enough to sort of actually open up to. So I think that's really nice that they do it here. And this is what really sort of, gives Bolin sort of the inspiration about, sort of what this sort of rock sort of means to him.
Mm-hmm. So, he runs off and goes to find their old memory box. Inside, he basically takes out one of the very same rocks, stones, and he reveals that their mother gave him one when he was little. He used to get really antsy, and their mother would give this rock to Bolin to kind of help him calm down. And he would use this a lot, especially in or around when their parents died. He then put it away for safekeeping because he didn't want to lose one of the few things they had left, reminding them of their parents. One of the things that was said about it by their mother, Naoki, was that the rock was apparently very rare and hard to replace. It apparently came from the island where she grew up, which he doesn't know the name of. Mako doesn't either, because she never told them, because she never liked talking about her past. So this is what properly connects the dots in terms of, like, it's not just the investigation, but the brothers are actually, like, interlinked into this as well, or at least their mother is. So they're just trying to now effectively find out the identity of the island where their mother came from, which is also part of this situation as well. So the stone, they have to get an identification on it in terms of, like, is it really well known that these stones come from an island? That's what they're trying to do here. So cool explanation here, because it's the Naoki kind of proper introduction into the story here. A little bit of insight into the past in terms of, like, Naoki and Bolin helping him when he was worried, and the next part of the investigation. What were your thoughts on the explanation of the stone here?
No, I thought this worked pretty well. I think the fact that there's a more direct connection with the brothers obviously makes you more invested in the story, makes Bolin more invested in things, and is, sort of the key lead that Mako needs, because without this, he's pretty sort of like stumped, because he doesn't really know, what island of many Fire Nation islands, especially since, now we have a better understanding of the Fire Nation islands and sort of their history, which one out of the many, they could really sort of be on. So I like that there's, some sort of link here that actually, tells us where they're actually going, and that, we can actually see how this means to the brothers and their sort of history. So I like that we're actually, getting some of their history, which is something that, we sort of have wondered for a long time now. So I think it's great that we're actually going to get that.
Mm-hmm. So then we have Mako, who's now in his sort of classic outfit here. So he's obviously outside of his jurisdiction. He's not meant to be officially on the case here. But he goes to this curios shop. They don't really properly name it. It's like, has like artifacts and stuff like that. Is it a toy shop? I'm not really sure. But yeah, there's some really cool Easter eggs in the background, like some of the masks we've seen in various episodes. There's obviously a fire ferret kind of, I think it's usually like a cat thing with the kind of paw that moves back and forth. A music box, Mako opens it up and it plays Little Soldier Boy. And then the guy who owns the shop walks out, and Mako gets to eventually, convincing the guy to identify it for him as long as he buys some of this karashi. So yeah, he shows him the stone and asks about it. It's immediately revealed to be a worry stone. It's a somewhat uncommon trinket, but it is authentic. It's unique. It's a type of pumice. It's very rare. And there's only one place in all of the Fire Nation it could have come from, and that is Penquan Island. I'm not sure if that's the actual pronunciation of the word. It's not Penquan Island or something like that, because I think it's the Chinese word that means fountain, which is pronounced roughly like Penquan. But yeah, finally get the name here mentioned. Mako's never heard of it before. The reveal about why it's kind of so not well known is that it used to be a popular destination, but that was from before the war. Families from across the Fire Nation would go to Penquan to witness the famous geyser Hakizashi in action. So what was it famous for? This geyser would erupt at the exact same time each day, like clockwork. They say it's quite a sight. So that's kind of why I guess it's called like Fountain Island, quote unquote. So how does he get there? There's only one freight captain who goes there, and he's lucky, that you have to go to the guy named Mizono. He dropped off some goods from her yesterday, so he should still be at the port. So the timing's going to work out nicely for him to be able to go there. But it speaks to the fact that, he's one of the only guys who goes there, so it's quite out of the way. So what are your thoughts on this section here? We get the identification of the Worry Stone and the proper introduction of it's the island from the title of the book.
Yeah. I mean, it's always, cool or funny or whatever when you get the sort of title of the book sort of set in the actual comic here. So no, I think it works. I think this feels sort of authentic to what sort of would happen, and sort of Mako doing this off on his own time in his sort of, typical attire. He's not doing this sort of as an official person, but he's still, it still feels like sort of Detective Mako nonetheless. He's trying to figure out this, and, he sort of has to, like you're saying, he has to force his way to actually get the information about this, sort of stone here. So no, I like this. I like that he's going, in this sort of, Republic City. It's cool that they have these places like, this, I guess, importer essentially of Fire Nation goods here. This would be where he would be able to sort of figure out this sort of information here. This feels very sort of, detective noir type status of, how they would do things here. So no, I like that. I think that this whole part of it works well. And Michael sort of, being a bit awkward in his conversation here. I think, maybe if he was in his more sort of like a official, police officer, he wouldn't be a little bit as sort of awkward here. But, I think it works. It feels sort of like Mako and this sort of interest here and sort of getting forced to buy all of this sort of food just because he wants this sort of information here.
Mm-hmm. So from there, he brings the karashi that he got home. Mako doesn't really even know what it is. Bolin does. And basically says it's like Fire Nation mustard, and so he's going to cook using it, basically. Mako at this point reveals that, I'm heading to the Fire Nation tonight to further investigate this mission, of course. He reveals some of the information that he just got to Bolin, and Bolin obviously connects the dots of like, oh, so you think that's where Mom was from then? Yeah. So Bolin is like, I'm coming too. Even though Mako warns him it's going to be dangerous, he's still going to arrive. He says, like, I'm involved, I found the stone, I'm going to go with you, basically. And yeah, he's invested because they might find something out about their mother. So they immediately want to leave, which they immediately cut to that happening, which is where we get the technically 2 panels, but really one of Korra and Asami in the book. They're going to look after Pabu while the brothers are gone. And we just get a nice shot of the two of them kind of arm in arm, kind of waving goodbye to the brothers. It's a really nice shot. A lot of Korra Asami fans are quite happy to see this, even if it is the only shot of them in the book. There just wasn't time in this book for a side plot with these characters, unfortunately. Mako and Bolin needed the full page count here. But it's nice that they gave us this as like a tease maybe for the future, and a one shot that maybe does feature Korra and Asami more. But what are your thoughts on this? The scene where we see them decide to go to the island.
Yeah, no, I think this is great. I like that Bolin immediately is able to put this sort of connection together here and sort of force himself on this sort of trip here, which, I don't know, it seems like there would be no way that Bolin, would not want to be part of this. I know Mako, is typical sort of trying to do his sort of lone wolf type of thing, but especially with his brother, that would be a hard thing to sort of deny him in this sort of instance here. But no, I think this is great. It's fun. I mean, it's fun to see, Bolin with the sort of, apron on and everything ready to cook and then instantly ready to sort of go, which feels totally in line with Bolin and his sort of character as well. So no, I think this was a great way to sort of see them off. And, I guess it's always nice to see Asami and Korra in this, even if they're, like you're saying, there really wasn't enough time to sort of have anything with them in this one. This is definitely sort of focused on the brothers in this one here. I mean, I do wonder if they could have taken Pabu with them, but I know sometimes they do leave their animal companions behind, so I guess it kind of works.
Yeah, it also feels a little bit like to save the artist. It's like, okay, we've done the drawing Pabu in unique panels for like 25 pages. Can we stop that now? That's probably part of it as well. But yeah, from there we cut to on the ship, so we get to meet this kind of ferry captain, Mizono. And yeah, they just have a conversation back and forth with him, highlighting that he's the guy who actually goes there somewhat regularly, but he still kind of points out that it's not known for much except the big geyser, and that in terms of stuff that they export, it's like, the island needs rice from the mainland, but they export fancy muds and volcanic rocks. So the fact that it's a volcanic island is kind of its main thing. It's kind of uniquely volcanic in that way. He shows him the worry stone. Mizono has seen these before, but they don't export them necessarily, but they are from the island. Bolin in the background looks through some of the stuff that he is kind of bringing back and forth, and you have the kind of Fire Nation headpiece that Bolin attempts to put on. But this is basically when they're just about to arrive. See the reintroduction of some characters from before. But what are your thoughts on the scene here with the ferry captain here? Mostly just giving some kind of, this is what someone who's somewhat familiar with the island but isn't like from the island knows about it.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting perspective to hear someone who actually really knows about the island. Because brothers, obviously they don't know much at all. So to hear at least one perspective of the island and sort of what they're sort of known for, what other people have known them for, even though no one goes there, I think it definitely lends an air of mystery. Which is the whole idea of everything. What is this island about? Why is it sort of remote? Why is it sort of forgotten in time? So I think it helps to sort of set the stage of why there's this air of, otherness about this island that seems to have been sort of like forgotten in a way, right? Which I guess is kind of sort of done on purpose, as we sort of find out later on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because that's like two characters who've kind of pointed out that like it used to be a tourist attraction, but now it isn't anymore. Why did that happen? And we're shortly about to get that. But we do then, on the boat just before we arrive, get introduced to Hisa and all the kids once again. And she's kind of pretty angry. Did you follow us? No. They honestly didn't know that she was going to be on the ship. But obviously it highlights that they're all heading back to this island. So everything absolutely is connected in this way. She wants to know why they're going to the island. He just kind of tries to connect with her and kind of highlight that, no, I want to help you out with what's going on. Your friend Haijun, she again says, we don't want your help. Bolin, obviously he introduces himself properly at this point, and he's like, hey, I'm Mako's brother. He didn't mention me. Wow, she doesn't like you. Everyone goes to sleep, but Kibi is having a hard time sleeping because of the movement of the boat. This is where Bolin gets his kind of chance to shine. He comes over. He gives the worry stone to Kibi to kind of calm him down. He also gets to talk with Hisa properly at this point, revealing his unique kind of like job history of like, you're not a cop too, are you? Not anymore, just a regular old ex-actor, ex-pro bender, current presidential assistant. So yeah, Bolin has a nice moment with Kibi where he helps to calm him down. And Hisa can see that, Bolin and Mako are kind of good people. She doesn't have to be on edge around them because Mako's a cop. And we'll get into that kind of going on from here. So I like that these characters do come back into it because we need that kind of connection to the island and like some good characters from the island as well as the bad ones we're about to meet. And yeah, this is a nice little connection here because of what they're kind of going to do with the main Mako-Bolin dynamic. Bolin getting to kind of be the big brother in this situation is a key thing to show ultimately here. And the stone gets used in like another way, which I also like. So what are your thoughts on this group of people?
Yeah, no, I think this is sort of classic Bolin, right? Like him being able to sort of connect with people on sort of like a really quick, really sort of emotional level here. So I think that's, probably, the best reason for having Bolin around is that, one brother's super awkward around people, one is really good with people and is able to sort of bridge the gap here. So no, I think this is a really nice scene just to show him, being able to calm down, able to sort of pass on the Warrior Stone. I think that's, it's nice that that's from, their native island. They're all from the same island here. So, yeah, I think this is a great way to sort of, branch the gap here between them and this sort of, perilous sort of journey that they have that, of course, is storming to make things a little bit more sort of uncomfortable. But, that's sort of typical of these sort of things here. So, no, I thought that was nice.
Mm-hmm. Bolin kind of helps to convince Hisa to trust Mako, that like, hey, he is just worried about you and the kids. He's a worrier. He could probably use one of those stones too. She then goes over and sort of confronts Mako and is just like, what is your angle? Why are you here? Are you really looking for your family? Yes, but he also is kind of still sort of investigating because he has connected to what's going on with the kids. She then kind of gives him a warning. I'm doing what I need to do to keep those kids safe, and I don't think you'll find what you're looking for on the island. My advice, when we get there, stay on the boat and head back to Republic City. If your mom left, she probably did for a good reason. So this is one of these situations where, like, I suppose Hisa probably could reveal to Mako and Bolin at this point, like, what the deal is with the island, but it has to be a mystery for a little later on in the book. But I think I get why, like, a lot of the characters don't really want to talk about the specifics. But this is the mystery of, like, why did Naoki leave? Why does everyone want to leave the island? Now that's a few mentions of that. And now a threat of, I'm doing what I need to do. I don't think you'll find what you're looking for here, suggesting that won't go too well. It's an interesting kind of turn here, but I like that we're now on good terms with Hisa, with, like, all the characters. But what are your thoughts on this scene?
Yeah, I think being able to sort of find at least some common ground with these characters, it helps, later on when they really do need to sort of work together. So yeah, I think it's nice to see at least this initial sort of bridging the gap of, them, at least not being at ends with each other. So no, I like that.
Mm-hmm. So at this point, they arrive on the island. Kibi gives the Worry Stone back to Bolin. Hisa and Mako have a conversation where she's kind of like, oh, you're actually going to go onto the island, and Mako's like, I'm going to sightsee, I want to at least see the eruption tonight. But she does say, good luck finding your family, as they separate. Then they talk to the first kind of islander that they meet, this guy at the dock, and they're like, oh, we're visiting for a bit, and he's like, there's not much to see here, I think you got your islands mixed up. And they just mention, like, the geyser, our mom might have been from here. They ask him, like, hey, it's probably from, like, 30 years ago, but did you know her? Her name was Naoki. And the question is, sorry, you're saying your mom was from the Fire Nation? And he reveals that, like, oh, yeah, we're brothers. Our mom never told us much about where we came from, so we're trying to find it ourselves. And he just points out that, like, oh, you don't look Fire Nation. And they have to point out that, our dad's from the Earth Kingdom, and yeah, just the connection of, oh, this is one of those kind of legendary mixed families from Republic City. Mako's like, is that a problem? But he says, no, of course not. But unfortunately for you, Naoki is a pretty common name around here. You can try asking Sheriff Ponzo. He knows about everything, everyone's goings on. And he points him to, like, the sheriff's office over there. And Bolin's kind of like, that guy was a little rude. What happened here? And I think the idea is kind of, I suppose, meant to be that, like, he kind of clammed up maybe a little bit once he found out some of this information. He probably, is the whole Naoki's a common name actually a thing? I don't think so. I think the second that name came up, he didn't want to say anything, and it's meant to link into, the mystery, the kind of control aspect going on this island. But what are your thoughts on this initial arrival scene?
Yeah, I wonder if that's sort of like a clam up because of, the situation on the island, or just because, they're just outsiders in general, or that, they just don't look like them. It's curious to see, because some characters, like when we get to later on, like clearly they're sort of like intimidated by the situation going on, but he doesn't necessarily give off that vibe directly here. He's just sort of like, all right, these dudes are some weirdos who just happen to come to this island, even though there's no real reason to be here. So I don't know. That it's definitely sort of a odd welcome to the island, but that's sort of the whole vibe that we're supposed to get from this. So I think at least in that regard, is done well.
Yeah, like, it's meant to be sort of cult-like, and I guess, like, this is how they treat outsiders type thing. Be suspicious of outsiders is probably a big thing Ponzo is about. But yeah, when we get to see the main, like, village, the immediate reaction is, oh, this place is so quaint. It's definitely old world, in that we're in pretty modern times with what Republic City looks like and places like Zaofu. But yeah, this looks like how things would probably look back in, like, the Kyoshi era or something like that. Fire Island here. Very kind of old school looking buildings, lots of kind of like farming happening right there. Even the clothing looks more like it's from the previous era than the current era, which is why Mako and Bolin actually do look odd among all the other characters. So straight away they're pointing out that, like, okay, a bit of an island forgotten to time a little bit, purposefully not moving along with the times. That's interesting. So yeah, they do go over to the kind of sheriff's office. They want to know if he knows anything about Hai Jun. And Bolin then asks, so even though Hisa said you didn't want your help, you're still going to secretly help her anyway. And Mako just points out there's no harm asking a few questions as they head in. But yeah, what are your thoughts on the general look in terms of the overview of the island?
Yeah, no, it definitely has that sort of, like, I guess you could say, island sort of old school sort of feel to it. It definitely feels like it's, more agricultural based, especially, coming from the city. Of course, it's a very sort of stark contrast to that. But I mean, that's sort of like, sort of the idea that you would get regardless, even probably back when this was like a popular place. It probably still had the same sort of vibe and feel to it. Maybe it was a bit more sort of open, not so secluded, and everyone sort of staring at them, as we can see here. But yeah, it definitely has that sort of, isolationist type feel, with everyone sort of keying in on the sort of outsider, especially since, we already know that, it's not often, at least in the last, couple of decades, that people come here, and especially not from the city. Like we said, it was more of a tourist place for fire nationals. So even from that regard, it would be odd to see people from, sort of the big city to come over there, even though, depending on the timing of when, Republic City was founded and, when people were traveling and stuff like that, like how often would those specific people even come to this sort of type of island? So it definitely does, make anything that they do here sort of stand out, which I don't think there was any way they were going to avoid that regardless.
Mm-hmm. Then more worry signs begin to start as they kind of head inside, and they immediately see on the walls pictures of like a bunch of the Fire Lords. So that we have like the classic ones that we've seen in art before. So like there's Taiso there, Sozin, Azulon, Ozai. But then it is specifically noted that no Zuko, no Izumi, the most recent Fire Lords, they're not here. So purposefully keeping in the past the old era before the Fire Nation like changed for the better is the kind of point being made here. Bolin saying, should we be worried that they're into homicidal Fire Lords? Where's Zuko or Izumi? And Mako's just like, yeah, it's weird. Maybe they're just traditional. Maybe they just like the art. So he goes up to the guy and is like, hey, I'm here regarding the investigation. I'm a detective from Republic City. Can I ask some questions with the sheriff? And the guy goes to get the sheriff. As we see another piece of art, which is kind of like, makes me kind of question a little bit, like, when was official art of Phoenix King Ozai, given how long that whole thing lasted? Where do you get this from? Who even knew what it looked like? How many people saw this? I guess some Fire Nation people did, but it's an interesting one that he has this, showing, I suppose, how much he's focused on the past. But yeah, right on the end of this page, we are introduced to Sheriff Panzo. Well, what are a couple of Republic City boys doing on our humble little island? We'll get more into Panzo in a second, but yeah, the main thing here, what are your thoughts on the Fire Lord stuff on the wall?
Yeah. I'm pretty sure for anyone who's familiar with it, that throws up a whole bunch of sort of red flags there. And I think that's what, sort of the brothers, or at least Bolin, is sort of, gravitating towards pretty quickly there. And especially, yeah, with Phoenix King Ozai there, they did have, the banners made that we did see, at least in the initial sort of, crowning of him and his new sort of, to-be world order, I guess you could say. So I'm not surprised that there is stuff of that, but yeah, it probably was sort of, a hard sought after item to come by, or, maybe someone who was actually, involved in that whole thing, sort of fled to this island when things sort of went belly up during that whole sort of era there. So I don't know. I guess that's the whole idea of this island, and sort of its history and traditions and stuff like that. But yeah, no, I think it works well. It's funny, Mako's trying to use his badge, even though he's not in sort of his official sort of outfit here or anything like that. Bolin pointing at it is always a nice touch as well. But yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting how, they made note of him of this sort of being outside of his sort of territory to actually do anything, yet he still tries to use his badge. So I don't know. I mean, I guess at least get the initial sort of talk here, even though it doesn't quite work out that well as we find out. But yeah.
So, immediately Bolin is kind of like, hey, our mom might have been from here, so we're kind of from here also. And he's just like, yeah, sure it is. You're here about a missing person. Haijun gets brought up again. Does his description ring any bells? Afraid not. Mako tries to give even further information, but yeah, Ponzo just tosses his badge back at him. This hunk of tin might mean something back in the big city, but it's worthless here. And then he proceeds to tell Mako about, like, this is how things are done on Penquan Island. Here we honor tradition and protect our own. We take pride in delivering justice. And as soon as a boy starts firebending, we train him up. And when he's old enough, we deputize him. Our firebenders are the law. And that's why we close more cases than any other force in the nation. Probably more than you Republic City jokers too. I take my job very seriously, and if one of my citizens has a problem, I'll deal with it. Penquan is a nice, peaceful, real Fire Nation community, and we intend to keep it that way. So you best head on back to where you belong. And while this is happening again, we kind of zoom in on the kind of Phoenix King Ozai portrait in the background, and the idea is that, like, his shadow is in the same kind of silhouette as he's kind of speaking. He activates his own firebending as he speaks as well to give it a little bit of an air of threat, and he just turns his back on the brothers at this point. So this is interesting. So straight away, like, the whole idea of, like, he's a sheriff, and then it's not quite that he has an army, but all the boys who are firebenders on the island are immediately trained to be officers, basically. So very kind of controlled in that way, very focused on firebenders. They are the law. Like, he obviously, control is a huge thing for him, closing cases, and again, very anti-outsider here. So he's super pro Fire Nation, but as we'll kind of get, he also doesn't like the rest of the Fire Nation. Like, the key thing here is a peaceful, real Fire Nation community. Like, why does he need to say the word real? I think that tells you a lot about him. So what are your thoughts on Ponzo now that we have a few scenes of him here?
Yeah, I think it comes off pretty clear that has a particular view of things, and that sort of, a past sort of view, especially with all the art and everything, and focusing on the Phoenix King and sort of, their idea of sort of what makes sort of the right and the might of their city, and what keeps the peace in their sort of island here. I think it becomes pretty clear, sort of how he, is controlling things without, directly sort of saying it or anything like that. And I think, at least Bolin definitely gets the odd vibes of the whole situation here. So no, I think this is interesting to see this sort of interaction here, especially when they're, sort of comparing themselves to, the Jokers of Republic City. So clearly he has an issue with how things have sort of changed, at least in his view, not for the best, especially considering, sort of who used to own Republic Island, or who used to sort of initialized it.
Mm-hmm. Outside, we obviously addressed the idea that Ponzo did not want to answer any questions. Mako feels he's hiding something, so he's going to ask around more. Someone has to know Haiju. Bolin at this point, tells Mako to wait, and kind of says, hey, how about we drop the case? You drop the case. The kids are okay, right? What if we just use our time here to find our family? Mako counters by saying, you don't get it. It's my duty to protect people, and if I can't do my job, what else am I supposed to do? Bolin says, your job isn't who you are. Mako gets quite angry at this point and says, yes, it is. It's always been my responsibility to look after people, to look after you. Bolin says, I'm not a little kid anymore, and right now I don't need a protector. I need my brother. Mako says, I'm sorry, but I need to see this through. Bolin kind of gets annoyed at this point and says, fine, I'll go find Mom's family on my own then. Good luck solving your case. And the two storm off as Mako kind of sighs, looks up at the sky and says, he'll be okay, just focus on your job. This is an interesting scene because it's meant to kind of be the emotional kind of character arc moment of the book. And the point is kind of clearly made. Like, Mako's kind of maybe too focused on the job, but it is a bit of a weird angle with Bolin kind of telling him to like drop the case when there is clearly something going on. And the idea that like they're not making the point that Mako doesn't want to find out about anything about their mother. It's just that one of them has more of a time constraint on it than the other. So it kind of puts Bolin in a slightly odd position here, kind of like defending not caring about kind of what's going on here and just doing their own thing. Obviously there is a kind of point here where Mako is maybe overly focused on being the protector, that sort of idea. There is a bit of a personal kind of moment that needs to happen here of like this very kind of final stage of their kind of development as brothers, of just like accepting that he'll always care for his brother and try to protect him, but he doesn't need to be that protector at all times. So it's a weird one where there's some really good stuff here, but it's also maybe it probably needs a bit more time, and it doesn't really have the time. Like, it has to be done in these 2 pages, and especially because within 2 pages they'll be reunited again. It's like you can tell that this is maybe where the page count is really becoming a bit of a struggle here. I think it's mostly fine. It just kind of comes across a little bit weird that what point are they really trying to make with Mako, where it's good that he cares, but like now it's like you care too much and you're not focused on this thing. It's they're maybe trying to be a bit too specific with a point about Mako. But what are your thoughts on this back and forth between the brothers?
Yeah, no, I definitely get that idea there, that it feels like, Mako's whole purpose for going to the island was to look after, these kids and sort of their, what they sort of brought him up as the issue. Like even though this island does have a connection with their family, and Bolin was the key to sort of like figuring that out, Mako's idea was always to help the kids and then sort of, figure out anything about the family, versus Bolin's sort of point was always to sort of, learn about his mother and sort of where she sort of came there from. So I think, maybe from the beginning there, both of them weren't necessarily clear on what their main goals for coming to the island with, or maybe they just, they didn't understand it. And that could have probably been explained better between the two of them. Maybe that would have been something like you're saying, where if they had a couple more pages and Mako was sort of, turning up more dead ends, that, Bolin could have said, okay, so now that we've done all of this, now we could have, gone and searched more stuff for our sort of mother here, and that could, lead to other things later on. Maybe that might have been a way that it could have done it without Bolin sort of seeming, maybe not caring as much about these kids and sort of their plight. I don't know. I'm not sure, because I definitely can sort of understand Mako's point of view. Maybe not the way that he went about telling Bolin it, that's sort of, a bit more too sort of like forceful, which is why, eventually they do have the sort of makeup later on, which I think, does work rather nicely. But yeah, it definitely feels like this maybe was too soon to have their sort of initial sort of conflict on the island of what their sort of overall goals for being here is. But I do like that, Mako does, take a second to sort of, think about sort of what happened and realize that, you don't necessarily have to be there, directly for Bolin and what he's sort of doing, that he can't protect himself. And I think at this point, they're both accomplished benders. So, they have that sort of, backing behind them. But, of course, their family, they're always going to look after each other regardless.
Yeah, and then that bending kind of power point of view, it's like, technically you might say like Bolin's more powerful, because like lava bending is the kind of rarer, kind of more powerful technique, sort of. But, that's not really what we're talking about here. But I think this is probably where, like, it's a Mako one-shot comic heavily featuring Bolin. They probably needed more pages to make it a Mako and Bolin one-shot, in that if they had more page count focus on Bolin specifically to build up the real, like, strong emotional want to find out about their mother, whereas so far in the book, it feels more like a bonus that, like, we might find out something about her mother. Whereas this is kind of like almost the reveal that, Bolin's actually, like, emotionally connected, invested. Like, he really feels this is important. And it's only kind of in this moment where it feels like that. Whereas everything so far has pointed to like, okay, there's actually something serious going on with the case, but maybe there's something with the mother that we might find out about. But again, like one of them has a time frame, like one of them has like a threat with people they've actually met, and then another one is like, maybe we'll find our mother's family. And again, it's just a time thing at this point. And we'll see even as we go into the next page that it's getting a little rushed as we build towards the end. So yeah, Mako goes around asking people stuff and is beginning to get like no answers. Even more so than the guy at the dock. These are kind of evasive answers here. Yeah, he asks about Haijun. No, never heard of him. Please, if you're not going to buy anything, leave. And he's like looking to the side and watches Mako as he leaves. Some of the farmers he doesn't get an answer, and so on as we go forward. He asks another guy, that's the situation there. Mako even points out, funny, every time I mention the name, people get very nervous. Do you know why that is? And he just acts even more nervous. Then suddenly, Hagizashi begins to erupt, basically. And this is shocking because it's meant to be at an exact time of the day, like every day, but it's happening earlier instead of the evening. So they all point out that this is a bad omen, a very bad omen, and we just are about to get ourselves into an incident here. So they obviously just spoken to the sheriff, so I don't think the sheriff has really had time to tell the people to be really weird about this. So I think this is just the people get very suspicious. There's elements of, City of Walls and Secrets, like the way people are talking about like the Dai Li and the war kind of is exactly what's happening here. But what are your thoughts on these few?
Yeah, no, it definitely feels like everyone is sort of in on something, and Mako can't quite figure it out. And I think that he's already had sort of like all the alarm bells sort of ring in on him, and people just sort of being evasive and not want to talk with him. Which, I mean, I guess for sort of a island that doesn't have necessarily a lot of visitors and stuff like that, you could sort of see that already to some degree. But yeah, I think definitely by sort of the last person there, it definitely feels like this is something that's more sort of sort of orchestrated. At least that's the vibe that I'm getting from it here. But yeah, I think it's definitely something to see him sort of go around and sort of get sort of stonewalled from any sort of information until something really big happens on the island.
Mm-hmm. This is when Ponzo arrives to kind of calm down everyone freaking out about the geyser erupting too early. He blames it on Mako and Bolin. These two Republic City boys who showed up today have brought bad tidings to our peaceful island. For thousands of years, Pension's faithful Hagizashi has kept time for us. As soon as these troublemakers appear, it changes. We know what that means. And the people begin to look at Mako. He's kind of freaking out because he's kind of been turned into the villain here. A soldier kind of grabs him, fire bends at him. Mako dodges because he doesn't want to hurt anyone. Someone grabs Mako by the shoulder, but it's Bolin who has the kids with him and is like, hey, we got to get out of here. So quick reunion here, and they head out in the middle of all the smoke that's come up from the geyser, basically. So then we get a chance to kind of calm down and address what has happened here. But yeah, the key thing here is the kind of manipulation here. You can tell Ponzo has so much control over this place, and he knows how to handle what's happening here. People are freaking out. Blame it on the outsiders. Of course the people will believe that. And anything they say in defense, they know not to believe it. So it's pretty perfect from him, but it just adds to the idea of what exactly is going on here. But thoughts on this little action scene here, the kind of villain stepping out properly into the spotlight here?
Yeah, it definitely has the sort of ominous sort of villain vibes here, and sort of turning everyone against him, which, I mean, him and Bolin are the only two outsiders on the island, right? So that's an easy ploy to get to. And, with this being such apparently a bad omen, you could see why they would sort of fall to that trap here, especially since they don't know Mako, they don't know any of his history or anything like that. So yeah, it definitely feels in that sort of reign that he just doesn't have anything to sort of, standout here. But no, I think it's cool that this also just sort of provides sort of the smoke screen of, his actual escape as well. So I like that it's sort of twofold in that sort of way here. And it's just interesting that that's sort of, the geyser, and that's how it's sort of, I don't know, manifests itself on the island here. It definitely feels a bit sort of unique, not necessarily what I was thinking of, but that might just because of how this particular eruption of the geyser was enforced.
So yeah, the question comes up, like, why does Bolin have the kids? Where's Hisa? It's revealed that they took Hisa away. So right after we got back, nobody else would help us, so we went looking for you. They found Bolin, and Bolin brought them here to Mako. Mako asked Jian, do you know who took her? Ming Ming speaks up and says, Grandpa. Who's your grandpa? The sheriff. He never wanted us to leave pension, because I'm supposed to be like him when I grow up, but I don't want to be. So this is actually a pretty huge reveal, because this is now like, okay, so these kids are Ponzo's grandchildren, and then their parents died. Their parents wanted to get the kids off the island. So the implication here, especially with the reveal at the end of the book about what happened to Naoki, is, did Ponzo have his, I guess, daughter and son-in-law, or son and daughter-in-law killed? Which is a kind of crazy reveal that they don't really get into. But like, if they had actually said that more clearly, would have really made him into an absolute villain, because like he seems to just care about like the future, like wanting like, here, you'll be the next sheriff type thing. And there's a few kind of interesting points here, like, the fact that, like, say Ming Ming is in the book, but like she doesn't really have a lot to do, whereas the two boys are at least connected with Mako and Bolin. They never highlight that, oh, is Ming Ming a firebender? But the whole firebenders, if they're girls, they're not meant to firebend point that's going to come up shortly. Does that apply to her? This is maybe where it feels like if the book had more time, this side of the story would have been fleshed out a little bit more, because it's actually really, really interesting. So what are your thoughts on this reveal when it happens here, that it's all this family, but this is Ponzo's family here that's kind of interlinked in all of this now?
Yeah, no, I mean, that definitely sort of raises the stakes, right? Because they're sort of related to the person who, presumably is doing all of these sort of bad things, and, has sort of ripped his sort of own family apart in some form or fashion, either directly or indirectly. We're not, completely sure, at least as of now. So yeah, no, I think that's definitely, I don't know, it adds more drama to it, which is, something to see. I like that, at least here we get to see Mako again sort of interact with the kids on sort of like a better level, because he's, probably going to be able to know what to do in this sort of situation here. So no, I like that we're at least getting these sort of reveal here. I wonder, would there have been a better way where we had more time to sort of explore this sort of family sort of connection here? But I mean, I think for what they're doing in these couple pages here, I think it's, it's fast enough and it's quick enough to sort of get things moving towards sort of the main meat of things. I don't know, maybe something where later on, if they had time in the pages, they could have explained it a little bit more, just sort of the history of the island overall. But no, I think as far as, moving forward with the story, this part, works more or less for me. I think this is, a good emotional bit.
Yeah. Like even sort of like almost like Hisa's backstory about, like, it feels like if this was like a trilogy, she would have probably been a character who got a little bit of backstory of her own in terms of like family friends. So I'm guessing she was either like best friends with like this Ponzo's son or daughter, or, their husband, wife, whatever way it was. And that would have been nice to see, because obviously that's an interesting implication, that the control from Ponzo was so much that even his own children, who were probably among the best treated, still could see that there was a problem, and that would have been really nice to more heavily bring up. But anyway, what we have here is Mako talking to Jian, and yeah, we just connect the dots here of like he sent his men after Haijun because Haijun helped to get the kids off the island. This is why Hisa was threatened, because Ponzo wanted basically his grandchildren back on the island. so he could, plan for the future, basically. John blames himself because Hisa got caught. Mako has a really nice line here, actually. It's not your fault, not at all. You've been a very brave big brother, helping Ming Ming and Kibi stay safe. You shouldn't have to do that when you're still just a kid yourself. Which is so interesting coming from Mako, where like this exact same thing happened to him, and it's like he needed someone to say that to him in a way when things were younger. And this is a huge part of like why he has turned out the way he has turned out here, like being the protector character who's still struggling with almost not being the protector, is that like he had to kind of grow up so quickly when he was younger. So this is actually a really nice scene here. But yeah, and then Mako says, we're here now, we're going to help find Hisa and Haijun, right, Bolin? Absolutely. Where did you last see Hisa? And we move on from here. But what are your thoughts on this scene between Mako and Jian?
Yeah, no, this is, another instance of seeing, Mako really sort of speak his feelings, really, have a heart-to-heart with this, older brother character, who's essentially in the exact sort of position Mako was in, right? So I think, that's the whole point that they're trying to show here, sort of play them together to show sort of their shared sort of history and how Mako's now in the position where he can help someone do this and they don't have to be all alone. So no, I think this was great. This is, Mako really, a great character moment for him to really sort of grow and to sort of help another character through a similar situation.
Mm-hmm. So, John reveals that Hisa was going to get water when she was taken. So they go to the well, and Mako goes into detective mode here. So scorch marks, signs of a struggle. There's then a trail, which leads to a kind of bucket of water that has been kind of spilled, of course. And, John's quite impressed by Mako's detective reasoning here. And Bolin's just like, yep, he's a good detective, I told you. The trail then leads into this kind of underground kind of cave system, basically. And he points out, the steam coming from the geyser is coming out here, which means this must be part of a connected cave system. Then he turns around to John and is like, John, is Hisa a firebender? And then we get this other kind of big reveal about the island and the way it works. Girls aren't supposed to do firebending. Grandpa doesn't like it. But she can't she? Bolin's like, what? How does this relate? So yeah, the reveal is that she keeps it secret. We aren't supposed to tell, but yeah, she is a firebender. And Mako figures out that the geyser must have erupted early because of a new heat source coming from somewhere or someone. So firebending is what activated it, specifically firebending underground near the kind of source of the geyser, basically. So that's Mako's theory here overall. So as we head into the big action moment, he doesn't want to put the kids in danger, so he tells John to step up, protect Kibi and Ming Ming, bring them home, don't tell anyone you found us. Bolin and he are going to go get Hisa back. And John does step up and says, I'll keep them safe, sir, promise. We also get a moment between Bolin and Kibi here, where he gives him the worry stone again. It protects more than boats. It'll keep you safe while we're gone. And Kibi agrees. Which leads to this very nice moment just before we go into the cave system of Mako praising Bolin for being basically a kind of big brother figure. You're a natural. I learned from the best. And then he does sort of like apologize to him for maybe treating him like a kid. So they have their usual kind of bro makeup here right before the action is about to happen here. So this is all really good, the way this kind of wraps up here in terms of some of this character stuff. And the reveal about Hisa firebending is also pretty nice with regards to the mystery to find her. But what are your thoughts on these couple of pages?
Yeah, no, Mako in detective mode and sort of working with the kids here. I think this is, great. This is a good sort of set up for, I guess, our big sort of finale here, right? I think it's nice to see, Mako sort of basically sort of pass the big brother torch down in this sort of instance here in order to keep the new sort of siblings together here. And even Bolin, I think, he does a great job, which I think, Bolin's always, really good with characters here, especially with younger ones. I think his personality always works very well for that. So yeah, I like him sort of passing off sort of the the worry stone again here. Not much from the sister in these sort of instances here. I guess she's just sort of calm overall compared to sort of the brothers here. Although, you do see that she cares about the situation going on. But yeah, no, I think this is great. And, the brothers having their sort of quick makeup, from their previous sort of issues very quickly, which is sort of how they've always done it before. So no, I think it works well. This all sort of fits in mode with what we sort of have come to expect, I think.
Yeah, the Ming Ming stuff is definitely where it kind of feels like, if there was more pages, I'm guessing they would reveal she actually is a firebender, but obviously has been restricted from doing so. And that might be a big part of why the parents wanted to get them off island, because that's Ponzo's kind of big restriction. That seems to be mostly kind of his own thing, because like that's not really part of like the Fire Nation as we know it, where like they do allow their women to firebend. You can maybe make the point that like maybe it's more like high up nobles in society who do that with like the Royal Fire Academy, but I don't think that's really a restriction that we've seen before. But it is notable that, yeah, like they made a decision to have like 3 kids, but only 2 of them are kind of important kind of to the plot to a certain degree. But so do you think there probably is maybe reveals like that she probably is a firebender going on in the background, that just the page count wasn't there for it?
No, I don't know. I mean, I think that would be a really nice touch, especially considering how they're not supposed to firebend on the island. But I don't know. I don't know. We've seen, Zuko's half-sister and her sort of bending, so it would be cool to have another younger, female firebender character, especially considering how that sort of sets up things. But I don't know. She doesn't have enough of a role to really sort of, have anything on her, which is just an unfortunate side effect of maybe the page count or just sort of how they, decide to do things. I mean, I think it probably could have worked if it was just the 2 brothers here, but maybe that was sort of like too on the nose in terms of comparing Mako and Bolin, so they wanted to add another character in, which I think from that perspective is fine to do that, so it's not exactly sort of like a carbon copy there. But yeah, it definitely feels like they could have done more with their character if they had the time, I think.
Yeah, like you could almost see a situation where like you maybe turn it into a situation where like you don't need like Hisa and Ming Ming, but like you change the dynamic where like that character is instead like the reasonably older sister. So it's maybe not as old as Hisa, but like older than John is. And you still get the kind of girl firebender plot kind of thing going on, but you don't have like an extra character. It doesn't matter too much. It's just kind of noticeable. But yeah, we're going into the cave system here underneath the geyser when they encounter a door. And Mako points out that, okay, he must have guards on the door. Can you make us an entrance? We're on a fire island, so an earthbender is going to be quite handy underground here. And yeah, Bolin gets them inside in ways that we've seen before in like Korra, where he really likes this kind of almost trapdoor thing from underneath the ground. So they don't go through the door because that would be too obvious. They kind of tunnel underneath and come out from a trapdoor. And we see that inside the kind of like door kind of cave area, there are cells built into the kind of mountainside. And there are a bunch of guards here. So the brothers jump into action, attacking. And yeah, there's some really nice art here as, yeah, Bolin uses earthbending to kind of grab a few people. Mako firebends a few of them off their feet. And yeah, Bolin can easily use his earthbending to kind of take out the metal kind of structures of the doors, because it's just metal in earth, so he goes around. And yeah, this is how they free Hisa. And we do also get introduced to Haijun. He's the second. But just in terms of the initial action, it's a very quick scene highlighting the brothers they have no problem against randomers like this. You need a more notable bender to in any way face up against these 2, but it's impressive to see them just be incredible, basically. But what are your thoughts on the action scene?
Yeah, no, this feels like, straight out of the show, right? Just like the brothers working together, coming out of the ground, sort of, behind enemy lines here. I still don't know how Bolin exactly knows where to go underground, but, regardless, it's cool to see them, sort of get the drop on these guys here. And yeah, they're just, they're too skilled, and, just earthbending in general, especially with people who aren't sort of prepared for that sort of attack, is pretty overwhelming in this sort of short amount of time here. So yeah, it makes sort of sense to me that they're able to sort of, take control of the situation here without much issue.
So, yeah, Mako reveals that, oh, I know about your kind of ploy with the geyser, and she's just like, that was impressive, Mr. Detective. She says, Hakizashi's water runs through the channels all throughout these caves. I hoped if I heated the rocks hot enough, it would erupt early, which is exactly what happened. Hisa and Haijun have a pretty big reunion here, so we get to meet him for the first time. She apologizes for kind of blaming herself for causing this, but he says, you don't need to apologize. I've always known the risks involved in sneaking people off the island. I'm just surprised it took this long for Ponzo to figure out it was me. So that's a pretty notable reveal that he's kind of been behind this for all of these years. This is Mako and Bolin. Mako insisted on helping, even though I told him not to get tied up in all of this, but thankfully he wouldn't take no for an answer. And so yeah, this is the reveal of this guy has been helping people get out of this kind of controlling island for all of these years, and we're going to get the reveal that he helped Naoki get off the island as well. So his explanation for why he does all of this is that he says the island has long been a kind of prison of its own. The sheriff views himself as the last true fire warlord and the faithful keeper of traditional Fire Nation culture. I always hated to see him and his men forcing our boys to fight for them and denying our girls the chance to hone their skills. Decades ago, I started smuggling people out on my fishing boat. They were kids and young people desperate for a full life, not the oppressive pageantry of this town. And yeah, then we get the confirmation that, yes, he also did help Naoki, and we'll get into that in a second. So, yeah, Haijun, who we've been investigating this whole book, this is the missing person from the start. Very cool reveal here that, Ponzo has this very controlling situation, and here's the guy who's got all these people off the island, and this is also the connection between the two plots here, the investigation, but also Naoki as well. So really cool stuff, and I like the explanation here of just, someone who realizes the importance of the Fire Nation to advance with the times, and that this guy is a bit lost in the past, basically, thinking of himself as a fire warlord from that's like the really early Fire Nation, that's like pre-United Fire Nation kind of type thing, and traditional Fire Nation culture, whatever he means by that, and the difference in kind of that idea of where things have come. But what are your thoughts here on the introduction of Haijun?
Yeah, no, I like this. I think it's cool that we get to meet this sort of older character that sort of connects things together. Has, he's one who has seen that times have changed and evolved, but this island has sort of somehow stayed sort of stagnant in that sort of regard here, and has always worked towards changing it. So no, I think this is really cool to sort of finally get introduced to him, get to his sort of character look, since we've had the kids, John sort of explain him and talk about his glasses and stuff like that. So it's good to put a face to the name finally here, and just to see sort of the backstory of the island and how things haven't always been sort of this. Have been this sort of traditionalist that hasn't sort of evolved, which is it's interesting to see that this island somehow sort of, I don't know, didn't involve with the rest of the Fire Nation, because we know that, a lot of the Fire Nation has changed, or at least we think it has. We haven't necessarily seen it in, as much detail as we would like in the more sort of modern Korra time. So I don't know, maybe this is one of those islands that sort of like slipped through the cracks, or, sort of isolated himself ahead of time in order to sort of stay on this sort of path here, because it's interesting that you say it feels sort of like the warlord era there, but yet there's still have sort of the artwork from the most sort of recent sort of fire lords, minus the most two recent ones, of course. So it's interesting to see that sort of perspective, but I think we can sort of come to the conclusion that this is sort of like a a warped sense of the sort of traditionalists of, sort of the Fire Nation, not necessarily, one to one with what was there in the past.
Yeah, and I think just in Avatar, that's always just the kind of thing in the storytelling is that there's always going to be these
Hmm.
obscure islands that are kind of forgotten, and that like the only other Fire Nation place we've seen in Korra's time is Bonte Island, which is also kind of, I guess, a bit separated from time. That not many people know they're there, but they know everything themselves, type thing. And this is just another one of them, mostly forgotten, I guess, because it just has very obscure exports and just does its thing. And I think there's also a little bit of an implication of just like most people who go there don't immediately see any problem there. They're just like, oh, it's a town that's a bit more old school. I suppose I'll just leave now. Um, with just how controlled everything is, so it just kind of goes a bit forgotten, and that no one looks at this as okay, this is really bad. We need to step in here. Any maybe inspections or officials from the Fire Nation come, that's probably time for everyone to be on their best behavior, and they know not to do anything because of Ponzo. Again, this is maybe where we could have used a bit more backstory on Ponzo in terms of like, okay, we're in the Korra era here, so he's not old enough that like he himself is like new Ozai or something like that, was a high up general or something like that. But like his father was he a high up like military official? Is that where this comes from? You'd like an
Yeah.
explanation like that to maybe fully connect the dots, but uh, to maybe not just make him come across as just really, really evil, like silly evil, but uh, they have the page count limitation, unfortunately. But we'll continue on. So yeah, any chance you helped our mom out? Her name was Naoki, and he says, "Ah, I thought you two looked familiar." He says to Bolin, "You have her smile," and to Mako, "And you, I see her in your eyes." And the two brothers kind of tear up at this, like finally kind of someone else who knew their mother and knew her from her old life, basically. So Mako asks, she never talked about her life here. What was she like back then? So they're learning this whole kind of new aspect to their mother here. So he says, "Oh, Naoki was smart and fierce and brave. She wanted so badly to get off the island and start a new life in Republic City. But I lost touch with her years ago. Tell me, is she still there?" And this is where the brothers unfortunately have to reveal that no, she and her father died when we were young. A firebender killed them in a random mugging. And then in one of the more villainous things we maybe ever seen in the kind of franchise, from off screen, "Are you sure that mugging
Hmm.
was so random?" And Ponzo walks into the cave system. Um, it's actually a pretty impressive crazy reveal. The only unfortunate thing is that you look at the page count. There's like maybe 12 pages in the book left. Do we have time to do all this massive reveal here? Um, okay, we're going with it. We're committing to the story. We're learning more about Naoki properly. Here's the reveal of kind of how that happened. Ponzo orchestrated Naoki's death, which we'll find out about here in just a second. But what are your thoughts on the reveals here about Naoki, and then the big villainous entry from Ponzo here?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's very touching that sort of finally, for the brothers to have a connection with their mom and sort of, find out a little bit about, sort of her personal sort of history and where she came from, and then, sort of immediately have it all crashing down, having to say that she's not around anymore here. So no, I think this is, this great, high moment for them to actually get this information. But of course, it's immediately brought down with the villain sort of coming in, and I think that sort of interest there, is just sort of typical sort of, evil villain moment there where they're coming in and of course they know everything, and that's sort of the worst thing ever, the worst possible sort of situation here.
So what Ponzo says here is, "Your mother had always been a troublemaker, practicing firebending even though it was forbidden," which I believe is the reveal that Naoki was a firebender. I don't think we inherently knew that before. I forget the details on it because I think there was like an old family tree that mentioned if they were benders or not. I'm pretty sure the main thing there was that like Senna was a waterbender rather than anything on this side of the family. So I do think this is a somewhat new reveal. Ponzo says, I warned her that if she didn't stay in line, there would be consequences. Then one day, she just vanished. Years later, I heard Naoki had turned up in Republic City, so I got in touch with an old friend who joined up with the Agni Kai triad, told him there was a big reward for whoever took care of her, and you get this really interesting panel here with the brothers suddenly very angry, very determined here after, this massive reveal about their past, the moment that kind of changed their lives forever. This is the guy who's actually behind all of that. Mako says, it was you, as he, gets some fire going in his hands. And Ponzo continues and said, it's like I said, if one of my citizens has a problem, I'll deal with it. Your mother got what she deserved. So completely unrepentant here and just thinking he's above the brothers here. But it certainly increases the stakes to a pretty crazy degree. Now everyone's emotionally invested in this situation here. So what are your thoughts on this? Like, this is Ponzo's reasoning for killing Naoki.
Yeah, no, this investment in this sort of situation here is felt by all at this point here. I mean, that's, pretty evil. I mean, it's interesting that he has, they're so sort of like isolationist, yet he knows people in Republic City. So I guess someone was allowed to leave the city, or maybe this was, before the city was, or the island was sort of as isolated. I don't know. That's interesting. But I guess, maybe it's just sort of like, bad guys all know some other bad guys regardless of where they're at, something along those sort of lines there. But yeah, I mean, he did say that he wants to sort of, control the citizens, and he's the one that is the sort of end all to be all. He tried to be a little bit sort of, coy about it before, but no, here it's just straight up. He's the one who's in charge.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, like, again, there's a lot of stuff that highlights here that, yeah, we needed some backstory stuff here to make this all, I think, fit together, like, kind of perfectly here, where, yeah, like how did he come to be the leader of this place? He thinks he's a warlord, but how did he even in any way become high up? And it's like, okay, I guess he's Fire Nation military, ultimately, so I guess someone who also was Fire Nation military, who maybe left, became a gang member, It sort of makes sense. Like, do they need to like explain everything in that level of detail? I'm not sure, but yeah, it's a big reveal. I do think there probably should have been a few more kind of Naoki insert flashback moments, just because like it's suddenly becoming quite important at the end. We'll get to the moment in a couple of pages time, but it's definitely kind of getting pretty intense here. So we jump into the big action set piece here. So Mako charges at Ponzo here, goes at him kind of full force here, kind of enraged. We lived on the streets, as he kind of jumps in. We had nobody, big fire punch. And it was all because of you, giant fire kick. Like, he's overwhelming Ponzo. But Ponzo counters with a big fire kick, sending Mako into the wall. He says, I gave you a chance to leave peacefully, but you refused to listen. You're a menace just like your mother was, and you're going to meet the same fate. So it seems like Ponzo maybe has the advantage here, but then he gets hit with a rock in the face. It's not a huge rock. It's Bolin's kind of usual accurate one, but it's a decent-sized rock here, and this distracts Ponzo to allow Mako to enter the fight once again. He says, Bolin says, you don't get to talk about my mom or my brother like that. Mako then is back ready to go again. He says, go help Hisa, who's actually in the background taking out the other fire kind of deputies like on her own. So he joins that fight to help her out. This is where we get a kind of secondary reveal about Naoki. Ponzo says she didn't have to die, If she had just stayed hidden, you wouldn't be a lonely little mongrel orphan. And then he says, but she just couldn't stop herself from helping others. It was her own stubbornness that killed her. There's some cool stuff happening here. Mako kind of fires back. They both have fire daggers for a couple of panels here. Then Mako does a big fire kick to send him back. And then he breaks out the lightning, and we get a really cool page here as he kind of pretty powerfully generates lightning here. It's really nicely done. He doesn't shoot it directly at Ponzo, just above his head, so he collapses the ceiling on top of Ponzo and basically has the fight won here. He hasn't killed him here, but he definitely has taken him out. And we just end with this, for him, who I suppose is so traditional, values fire bending so much, this is a particularly kind of notable thing that he says. You half-breed, brat, how could you generate lightning? And Mako tells him, you are nothing but a pale imitation of what the Fire Nation used to be. And you're no warlord, you're just a pathetic relic of a bygone era. Your time is over. So Mako kind of takes him in at this point. He basically like arrests him. So that's the defeat of Ponzo overall. So this is our big action kind of set piece of this kind of moment. The brothers together kind of get to do it, but they do mostly leave this to Mako to get this kind of one-on-one fight, this big win. What are your thoughts on this big set piece action?
No, this is nice. I like, we get the sort of, initial one-on-one, and then Bowen's coming in to help, and, of course, Mako is able to sort of seal the deal here. But no, I think it's good. I like that there's sort of, it's not like a super involved fight. It's over pretty quickly, which I don't know if that's due to the page count or just sort of what they had in mind, but I think it comes across sort of the back and forth of the battle here, as well as sort of the background elements here, sort of with them firebending and earthbending in the background with the other sort of deputies here. So I like that there's multiple things going on. And of course, Mako getting to show sort of the lightning bending, I think is always sort of a nice touch here. And, him sort of using it in an interesting way to sort of end the fight without, actually ending anybody's lives, which, that seems like an Officer Mako type of thing to do here. And yeah, I think it's, I guess it would make sense that sort of a traditionalist would put, a lot of emphasis on sort of lightning bending, lightning generation, having, sort of a very sort of specialized sort of lineage, and maybe Mako shouldn't be able to do that, but clearly they're sort of stuck in the times, or at least he's stuck in the times where we know that a lot more people can lightning bend now than they could in the past, so he definitely seems to need to sort of get with the times.
Yeah, especially because like the history of that is mostly, I guess, just that like high up Fire Nation people sort of kept it to themselves pretty much, and that's kind of the reason it's typically like the noble kind of high up lines and not the kind of normal people to a certain degree. But they've also kind of countered that a little bit with like Zhu Ping An being the kind of like the kind of rebel kind of Dao Fei guy who had it. And actually the idea that like Mako actually learned it from Lightning Bolt Zol, who is a gang member, it's a funny kind of turn up the way that happens. But yeah, it's a big moment here, definitely. I think the fight is pretty nice. I definitely wish there were moments where like the book had a little bit of a chance to breathe, because like you kind of mentioned a little bit there, it's like this is the way Mako typically fights. He's not out to kill people, but there's also no time for the book to even like address the fact of like when he charges in full bore at the start of the fight. Is he at the risk of maybe letting his emotions get ahead of him and like killing him? Like we don't get to do the sort of opening to like Southern Raiders kind of talk about this of like, has Mako lost himself to his emotions? Because it's so sudden. It's just like off screen, reveal happens, fight is happening like right now. There's no time to really let the emotions kind of linger overly. So it has to just be like a little bit of intensity, maybe Mako going overboard, and then calms it down and it's kind of cool under fire Mako again. It's still really good. It's just this is a page count issue in sort of like a different way, where it's just like we just needed time and some scenes needed to kind of breathe a little bit more overall. But I like his kind of comment here of just like, like you're a pale imitation of what the Fire Nation used to be. So it's not just that you're mimicking the past, but you're doing it like badly and worse with more control. Like you make people hate you even more than the way things used to be. So it is a pretty strong moment, though, overall. And yeah, in the background, you can see that like Bolin has kind of wrapped everyone up in earth as well. So the other side of the fight was successful as well. So yeah, the defeat of Ponzo here. As we go into the next page, they're dragged out in front of the rest of the kind of civilians. They're wondering like what's going on. Why did the outsiders have like our sheriff? Ponzo's about to try and like manipulate them, but Bolin puts a rock in his mouth. So that's a pretty common thing for Bolin to do. And then Hisa gets to speak up here and have this big speech where like she's the one to sort of like get across to the rest of the people like the kind of truth of the situation here. So it's a pretty decently sized speech here. So she says, my friends, my family, we've lived under the sheriff's rule for far too long. We have sacrificed our children's futures to his deranged nostalgia. While the rest of the Fire Nation has opened its doors and progressed, pension has stayed stagnant, but no more. The sheriff and his men will face justice in Harry Bulkin, and with them gone, we will be free to build a brighter future for our people. So we'll address these first kind of couple pages here. I like that we immediately jump in to sort of stop the group kind of think, the kind of narrative coming out of like almost like the cult members, defending themselves. Instead, it's like, no, we don't let Ponzo speak. Hisa, who the people do kind of know and trust to a certain degree, immediately gets to the kind of heart of the matter here. And I think some of the writing is quite good here, like calling basically like what Ponzo's been up to deranged nostalgia, I think is actually like a really good term for what he was about. And then, yeah, finally addressing the idea that you guys are aware that like the rest of the Fire Nation, like most other islands, have moved on. We've been stuck in the past. You may not realize that because maybe none of you have left the island, but that's a problem. And yeah, the sheriff and his men will face justice in Harry Bulkin, the capital of the Fire Nation. So that's, I guess, where they're going to be sent. I wonder how that gets organized specifically. Like, who does Mako go through to make that happen? But there's an initial kind of positive sense, or like we're free now. We have kind of control over ourselves. It continues, but just that's the first page of it. So what are your thoughts on this initial kind of reaction of the people with Ponzo being revealed as captured and then Hisa starting her
Yeah, no, I think Hisa's speech is pretty good here. I like that. Yeah, I think the idea that they don't let him sort of speak at all is for the best at this moment here, because he's, he probably, could sort of switch the situation against the brothers here, considering, they don't really know him. But yeah, I think, Hisa being, one who's been on the island, she's from there. Everyone seems to at least give her, the time of day to actually speak, at least initially, works out better for this, because it's, they're not so isolated that they don't know that, other things are going on in the rest of the world. It feels like they're at least aware to some degree, because they do have traders that come in and out. So there's some flow of information, even if it's not a lot. But, there's better things that can be done, and their future can be sort of changed here, which I think is, what she's trying to get, across in the initial sort of talk here.
Mm-hmm. The guy from the dock says, this is the outsiders' influence. They changed the geyser. They're going to change our traditions. And then, interestingly, I think this is a nice visual touch. Hisa activates her firebending, and everyone looks up shocked because it's a woman firebending on this island. That's a kind of crazy thing. Like, that's not done. They all know it's a particularly notable thing that she has control over it to do that. As she says, no, I changed the geyser. If I had not, I would still be imprisoned and the sheriff would still be calling the shots. In order for us to all live freer, fuller lives, we must embrace change, not be afraid of it. Otherwise, we'll be hopelessly stuck in the past forever. And she's starting to get through to everyone at this point. She says, many of you have known me since I was a little girl. You know I want what's best for all of us. Are you with me? And there's a lot of discussion happening. No one seems to immediately support her. But then John, Kibby, Ming Ming speak up. They support her, of course. And the kind of family kind of reunion kind of happens at this point. Then some of the others start to kind of join in. They say, I am too. They say, Hisa will make a good leader if she's willing. And then Haijun says to the brothers, but I worry it will take time to change the hearts of some villagers. We'll have to set up ferry routes to the other islands as well as Republic City. Once we're not so isolated, people will see the benefit of change. So things are beginning to kind of happen here. It took this impassioned speech, the idea of this kind of found family kind of dynamic here with Hisa and the kids, and kind of supported by Haijun here, that she will be a good leader for this island kind of going forward. But it's going to take some time because it's been, I guess, 30 plus years of like rigid kind of focus on the past, and now people are going to see how much the world has changed overall outside of little bits and pieces they've heard from the people who have arrived on the island. And it's an interesting one. It's a nice one in that, like, they're acknowledging it's not just going to instantly change because everyone decided to support a new leader. It's going to take time, but it will happen, and they'll all realize how, I suppose, oppressed to a certain degree they all were with the way Ponzo did things. So what are your thoughts here on the second half of her speech?
Yeah, no, it's a real sort of pragmatic way of seeing the resolution of the situation here, understanding that this isn't sort of like a quick fix. Even, when they had the 100-Year War, like, it wasn't a quick fix once the Fire Nation, stopped sort of invading other nations and stuff like that. So I like that, even on the small island that is, hasn't been under the sort of super, strict rule for that long, but it's still long enough that it's, been involved, especially for like sort of the older characters, which you have the older dock worker who was one of the ones who was outspoken, which is interesting, but kind of, I guess, makes sense that the older one would be sort of more invested in the sort of current goings versus, the kids are sort of the first ones that sort of, respond to her impassioned speech here. And, sort of that's sort of the dam breaking that gets everyone else sort of like invested, at least in the sort of idea of, opening up sort of the island and sort of seeing, how the rest of the world is acting here. So no, I thought this was a great way to sort of cap off this and to see how, she's going to wind up staying on the island and investing in sort of the people here.
Mm-hmm. The brothers are still talking to Haijun. They ask then in relation to what Ponzo said towards the end of the fight. Do you know what the sheriff meant when he said that if our mother had stayed hidden, she might have lived? And he points out that after Naoki got settled in Republic City, she was eager to help others from pension. So whenever I brought someone new to the city, she would help them to find a place to live and a job. That must have been how the sheriff found out where she was. In the end, she paid a terrible price for her kindness. So they're pointing out that if she had just settled down in the city, lived her life, and not stood out more by also assisting with the other people arriving, helped by Haijun, she might not have ever come to Ponzo's attention ever again. He says to the boys, I'm just grateful she got to live her dream, at least for a little while. She wanted nothing more than to have a family of her own. You boys gave her that. The last time I saw her, she bragged about you both something fierce. She wanted you two to have a better childhood than the one she had had on pension. I know things didn't work out like she'd hoped, but seeing the men you've become, she'd be so proud. And this is where we do finally get the kind of insert, kind of flashback kind of moment. We do get a scene of Naoki with the two boys when they were younger. So I don't know, Bolin is like maybe 3 here or something like that. So I guess that would make maybe Mako 5 or so. It's a really, really nice panel. It makes you wish there was a few more visuals for Naoki. But it's a really nice kind of speech about this, getting across the kind of importance of family to Naoki. This was a huge part of why she, left, which is what gets explained immediately next, which is Bolin finally asks, did our mom leave anyone behind? Do we have any relatives who still live on the island here? Haijun says, I'm sorry, I'm afraid not. Your mother was an only child and her parents passed before she fled to the city. I think her being alone is what finally drove her to leave. So that and the whole she wanted a family point meant that she didn't really have a connection to the island that ultimately kind of held her back. She couldn't use her firebending here. There was only one choice for her really to leave in the end. And then there's two more pages left, but we'll cover this here. So this is the kind of final kind of Naoki reveal here across this, where we learn more about her, the way she was, and also that no, the brothers don't have any living Fire Nation kind of relatives, that sort of thing. What are your thoughts on this page 74?
Yeah, I mean, it's too bad that there's not, much more for the brothers here, but I guess, that's sort of a way of sort of, capping this off without having any sort of extra loose ends here. It would have been nice to get more information sort of on her life here on the island, but clearly, living on this island wasn't sort of the best of times, which is, of course, why she fled and everyone else was trying to fled. So yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of, it's a sad ending for the brothers here. At least they do find someone who did know their mom and, did have a connection with her. So they do get, sort of that connection from, an older character who had sort of relations there. So, I like that there's at least some connection there, but, you can see that there's not as much here as opposed to the other side of their family, unfortunately, which is too bad here. But, the frame with them as, younger is very nice. I think that's probably one of the highlights here, to get to see them as sort of younger characters.
Mm-hmm. And then we go into the final two pages. So we just get, asking Bolin, are you disappointed that we don't have any kind of long lost relatives? Bolin says he's a little, but it's okay. He's just happy he got to know their mom a little bit better. Mako's happy too. Bolin praises Mako for cracking the case. He says, thanks, but I'm not a detective right now. Right now, I'm just your brother. And the two of them kind of walk across the island kind of like arm in arm, and that is where the book ends. I do think the ending is like extremely abrupt. I don't think just them saying, like, we're brothers right at the end here on the island is maybe the best place to end it. They clearly ran out of page count, and like this is probably the most efficient use of 72 pages exactly. They don't get any more. But it would have been nice to go back to the island and just show that, like, okay, Mako's going to change a little bit going forward, based on kind of what happened here, based on the kind of character points they were making in the middle of the book about him being too focused, overly focused on being the protector. Can he be a little bit more, I guess, relaxed with everyone, make more time for, being around his friends a bit more often, that sort of thing. It just maybe just feels a little bit like, okay, like, we know they're brothers. That was never really at risk. The debate that they had, the issue that they had in the middle of the book was never really going to be something that like properly fractured them. Like this brother dynamic was never going to be one where like we question that kind of relationship. So yeah, the page count unfortunately holds parts of it back, but it's still a nice ending overall. They got the answers about their family that they needed ultimately. But what are your thoughts on the final two pages?
Yeah, I definitely can understand the idea of it being sort of abrupt. I mean, I don't know, it does feel like that's sort of how, they would sort of come to the conclusion of things, at least between each other. Yeah, Mako's sort of uptightness, is that sort of solved at this sort of instance here? I don't know, because he kind of was right that there was a situation going on. So I don't know. It would have been interesting to see, like, if he reported back to the other officers, what would they have thought of this whole situation here? Would he have been like sort of justified in sort of going this extra length in this sort of situation here? What would be sort of the future results of this city? Like, what's going to happen with the former sheriff here? I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of things open there, and we don't necessarily need to know sort of like the final result of the island here, but it would have been nice to see sort of, at least on Mako's side, how does he deal with things sort of going forward here? Because I think, the brothers and their issues was, like you're saying, that wasn't really an issue overall, because they're still family. They're still going to figure things out. I don't know. Maybe there could have been other people on the island that could have known sort of their mother, and they could have got more information that way. I don't know, but it's a nice way. It's a nice frame. Them walking off into the sunset. I guess back to the docks, maybe, or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, like it feels like maybe the better ending point would have been that, like, hey, let's actually stay on the island for a few days. Like that Mako's making time to just like hang out with Bolin on the island to get to know it a bit better.
Yeah.
which is maybe implied by the ending, but I think they probably should have made that like a little bit clearer, that he's like, do you know what, I'm not going to rush to get back to work. I'm actually, while we're here, yeah, let's hang out. That sort of idea. Or cut back to, we're in the city and he decides, guys, I'm leaving work early. I'm gonna, go have a meal with like Bolin, Korra, and everyone, and they all freak out about like, oh, like you're best friends with the Avatar, or something like that. Would have been maybe a little bit like that fits the character arc for Mako, that he's a bit more relaxed now, a bit more casual. But we'll have to wait and see. Like, I guess maybe Mako's next appearance, if he is overall a bit more relaxed, that's kind of the hope with this. Yeah, will they follow up on any of this? Do they need to, like... Yeah, it's a tough one, because it does feel like, because it's an isolated island, when are we ever really going to go there? They could establish maybe in the future that like the brothers visit there like every so often, just because they have somewhat of a connection to it. Hisa kind of would be an interesting character to like just highlight that the brothers have this kind of friendship or connection with. Maybe they want to visit the kids, probably is actually maybe the bigger point. But where does that happen? Because it is a one shot, and we don't know when the next comic is going to be, because it's not going to be focused on the brothers. We'd have to see a return to like trilogies probably to get something like that. It at the very least maybe still leaves some of the Naoki stuff open, where if they wanted to do like a short story that's more focused on like maybe Naoki arriving to the city, how she met San, which I think is maybe what people were hoping we'd maybe get to see. Because there is still like quite a bit that maybe needs to be still covered there to a certain degree. But yeah, it's good. There's a lot going on here. It was a very ambitious story, I think, to do in a one shot, which I think made people excited for it, because it wasn't like a Katara and the Pirate Silver, where it's like, wait, Katara's doing what? It's no, like the picture of their families on the cover. They're teasing a new island stuff with their mother. That's big, and they actually deliver on it for the most part. I can maybe see some disappointment being here about the fact that like there really only is one panel with Naoki in it, whereas I think there probably should have been a little bit more. And I suppose just very briefly, the fact that the picture's on the cover but it's not actually like plot relevant. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I wonder why that sort of was set up in that sort of way. I mean, I don't know. I mean, and we don't get anything about sort of the father or anything like that, right? So there's interesting that that's sort of the way that they're sort of playing off of their history. I mean, I guess, that's the picture that we know that we have of them. So I guess it kind of makes sense to have it in that regard. I don't know. It definitely sort of makes it feel maybe a bit more dramatic than it really is in the end. I don't know. I mean, it was pretty intense, and there's a lot of things that go on said that sort of make it feel a lot sort of darker than, they say, sort of directly straight up. But yeah, I think I don't know. It definitely, I think, and again, I don't know if this is because, sort of it's taken so long to get to us that we sort of had, higher expectations than what we sort of got here. Because I do like that it is sort of, part of our main sort of character's backstory and history, and it does really sort of flush them out in a way that we didn't previously know, because we didn't know, we had really nothing on sort of the mother's side of things. So this is sort of like a very sort of neat and nice sort of isolated way to sort of get their story and not have a sort of question too much more about things, because there is no more family on the firebending side of this family here, which is, unfortunate. It feels like there could be a lot more there, but I guess, the idea that she's from the island and this island was already sort of isolated and it's not part of like the main Fire Nation island or anything like that, right? So there's sort of, there's no like big overarching connection, with Zuko and sort of his history and his sort of lineage. They're just sort of, random sort of firebender sort of kids, mixed firebender kids. So I don't know.
Yeah. I think the main reason probably the pictures on the cover is just that, it's the only official image of Naoki we have. Whereas if they just put a picture of her on the cover that's maybe new art, you might not know who it is. which is different than, say, like, I think Ursa being on the cover for, like, The Search Part 1, whereas at least we'd seen Ursa in quite a few scenes before that, whereas without the context of, oh, it's the family picture for the brothers. Okay, that's what it's about. But it maybe didn't help speculation, because I think everyone was assuming that, like, oh, is there like a copy of the picture that they're going to come across, and like that's actually going to be like relevant. Which I suppose it could have been, like, you could maybe do a thing where, like, you replace the worry stone in certain parts with the picture, and it might work maybe, but I don't think you needed it really. But yeah, it's a good start for Korra one-shot comics. It has the thing, like, I think with a lot of them, where, like, it probably could have a sequel if it really wanted to, but when will we? And then none of the ATLA ones have really had a sequel, and a lot of them probably could do it one. Like, I suppose, like, briefly getting to maybe speculation on that, at the very least we know there's 2 more coming. It's slightly a little bit up in the air about maybe, like, are we sticking with the same creative team after maybe some of the issues or not, but we haven't heard anything to say otherwise, so I assume it's this same team on the next one. I think Asami probably has to be the next one. Like, it feels like a really go-to thing, where they did Mako first, so they're clearly leaning towards main characters. Aang's never got his own one-shot on the ATLA side of things, so I'm assuming Korra's probably not in play for her own one. So yeah, Asami has a similar thing to Mako, where she probably needs a book to herself just to get that characterization on her own, but it allows Korra to kind of be the secondary character in her story, and people want to see more of that. Plus, there's some family stuff with her you can delve into if you want. People want more Yasuko. There's business stuff you can get into on a story with her. Otherwise, I think it's kind of tricky to think about the third character in terms of, like, okay, well, if it's not Korra, I think Bolin's kind of covered here as well, so I'd be a bit surprised if they just make it Bolin as well. So, like, Jinora, Tenzin, Kaya, Bumi, those are the characters we're kind of thinking about. But what are your thoughts? We led off here with this Mako, Bolin kind of double focus, but also backstory focus. Who do you think they might do for the second and third part of the one-shot trilogy?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I don't know. There's a lot that they could do, and I think, a lot of people will be happy with any of them if they sort of went that way. I mean, Asami would be nice because she does have a family thing that's similar to the brothers here, where we don't necessarily know all the information. But I mean, there's a lot of characters. I mean, I just wonder which ones would they want to touch that doesn't affect anything, sort of going forward with things. Because he's like, there's, all of our sort of villain characters all have, like, interesting sort of backgrounds, and some of them we know more about, some of them we don't know. Any of our minor characters, like from the Beifong family, any of those could be interesting to see, sort of what they're up to or what they're doing going forward. But again, that's, a lot of them are pretty pertinent to, so like the story and stuff like that. I don't know, would they do something with Korra's family that doesn't necessarily involve her directly? I don't know. That seems like something that they might necessarily avoid trying to do there. But yeah, I mean, any of the Airbender kids and their family, Boomy and stuff like that, would that be something that they would want to touch? Just do like a crazy sort of Boomy story? I don't know. That might be fun to see, but that also might seem like not sort of as important enough to do. I don't know. There's a lot of characters they could do with things. I mean, they have the whole Red Lotus that they could do stuff with, but again, seems very sort of like important and high level, so maybe they wouldn't want to touch that, especially in like a one shot. I don't know. There's a lot of options.
Yeah. The Red Lotus backstory stuff is what I think most people go to in terms of just open story content, stuff that people want to know about. But it's like, you're kind of thinking about it like this is going to be part of like a collection that will be like, on the cover it'll be like Mako, and then like what, like Pali and who else? Like, if you make the grouping too odd, like is it actually going to work? That's why, like, it's going to be interesting to see what way they frame kind of titling the ATLA second trilogy, with like Iroh, Azula, and May. What they call it, like at least they kind of make sense a little bit. And also, yeah, is one of their full villain backstories a little bit too much for one of these books? Potentially, they haven't really tended to go full backstory with these. Maybe just touching on bits and pieces. And it feels like it's just a little bit maybe too on the nose. So, yeah, that's why I lean like Asami, and then yeah, like Jinora, Kaya. I think Kaya is one people really want because there is like a lot of like, you know, touching on backstory stuff, but also just what's she up to kind of like day to day and stuff like that. Because like we know from like the RPG, she has her own, like, I think it's like a clinic, I think it is, like in the city somewhere that like they didn't really touch on in the show, and like that could be something nice to touch on. But yeah, we'll have to wait and see. I'm assuming we'll know who the character is at least by Comic-Con. Though they might have a lot of publishing announcements, so I don't know, this one might get lost a little bit in the middle of everything, because like they've got the next ATLA book to announce, the next Korra comic miniseries, maybe Beast of the Four Nations, and other stuff. It's hard to say, but I suppose that is the kind of main takeaway from this, though, is like we do need different formats for the comics. I think after all the one shots that we've had so far, it's like they're good, but I don't think they work as like the main and only line of comics that we have. Even now that we finally started the core side of things, it's like they're a little bit kind of random, one-off. I think we do need more specific stories. So like mini-series in addition to this is actually a good thing. But what are your thoughts on that? Like, how important do you think it is to expand away from just only one-shots?
I don't know. I mean, I really like, sort of having stories in three sets and sort of getting a big sort of overarching story, although I get that that's harder to do, and especially with, other sort of bigger projects, it's harder to keep things sort of in line in the bigger sort of scope of things. But other franchises and projects sort of do that, so it's definitely doable if they really had the inclination to sort of go that sort of route. So I don't know, I think it definitely would be cool if we could get sort of like single shorter stories as well as bigger overarching things that sort of are more meaningful to the universe sort of at large. But I think that might be, a couple years coming, before we actually get back to that sort of structure of things. Like once, bigger projects get rolling, there'll be hopefully more time for those type of stories to come back to the forefront. But yeah, right now it definitely feels like we're going to go with the sort of shorter iteration of things and different formats with that, which I think if we get enough of that, it might be enough if we get enough sort of short stories. But we definitely don't feel like we're at that level, at least to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just an interesting one, especially because the switch to one-shots, like, they never explained it super well at the time, in that, like, their explanation was just like, we want to do this, we want to move away from trilogies into sandbox-style one-shots. And then there's the kind of implication in the background of, like, Avatar Studios was announced shortly afterwards, so they're just, like, not doing big stories, so they don't have to maybe consider them for future content. But on the Korra side of things, like, as far as we're aware, like, they don't have a Korra project planned, at least that we know of. Even if you go with the idea that, like, oh, well, Korra, I guess, is a part of the new Seven Havens series, but that's the end of the Korra era. You can definitely still do, like, more notable trilogies without really creating issues, I think, for the future, if you just write the right stories. Like, what we were doing, like, Ruins of the Empire, was, like, Kuvira specific, but then also, like, democracy in the Earth Kingdom type thing. That doesn't seem, like, hugely, like, relevant to, like, that's going to affect what they have to write for Seven Havens necessarily. That's just, like, whatever leads to the cataclysm at the end of the era. Otherwise, like, everything's pretty much open. Like, the whole, like, what people want out of a trilogy is, like, can we go to the mainland Fire Nation with our characters? Is that going to get in the way of anything you're doing? I don't know. Now, maybe they do have a core project planned, but this is where their kind of communication doesn't like super help, because I guess we're going to find out coming up in January, I guess, if switching away from Avatar trilogies has actually done anything for them. Like, did they need to do the switches? Because if it doesn't, then it's like, yeah, we could have easily had like 4 or 5 more comic trilogies instead of the one-shots. There's going to be some questions asked about why they made that choice in the first place, because it does feel like, well, was it really that difficult to ride around potential big things in the future? I don't really think so. But yeah, that's our first Korra comic, and hopefully we'll get the announcement on the next one coming soon. But also, it's interesting that the way the releases have worked out, we have a new comic out in like just over 2 weeks, basically. Like 2 and a bit weeks, we have Ashes of the Academy is coming out on the Avatar side of things. So in just a few weeks, we're going to be pretty empty in terms of the future of kind of new content comics. So announcements are definitely needed coming up. Yeah, we'll be doing a similar review show like this on Ashes of the Academy when it comes out in a few weeks. But for now, yeah, that's been the podcast here, the review for the new Korra comic, Mystery of Penquan Island. It's been Avatar Online podcast episode 287. It's been with myself and Greg. Thanks for listening to this podcast, and bye.
Bye.